Affairs and Religious Liberty Director. Good evening and welcome to PARL Today. I am your host, Edward Woods III, Public Affairs and Religious Liberty Director for the Lake Region Conference of Seventh-day Adventists and the chairman of the Conscience and Justice Council. My, do we have a show for you? Regional conferences and us, engaging Generation X and Millennials. And we are super excited with the panel that we want to bring up at this time. Our panel features Claudia Allen, content manager for Message Magazine. Claudia, welcome to the show. Happy to have you, one of Lake Region's finest. And we promised we were going to do another show 4 weeks ago. And true to our word, we're making it happen. And Claudia, who's going to give us the best, because the last shall be first, because she has preached her heart out in California, preached her heart out. Where was the other spot, Claudia?
Jersey, Mount Sinai.
But you know, when she comes home, she gets an extra boost of the Holy Ghost. So we're just happy to have her here, one of our finest here in Lake Region. She's on loan in Allegheny East, but she's home to Lake Region. Happy to have her. I'm happy to have my friend, Dr. Carlton P. Bird, Speaker Director of Breath of Life Television Ministries and the Senior Pastor of the Oakwood University Church, Dr. Carlton Percy Bird. Welcome to the show.
Thank you, Brother Edward Woods III. I do appreciate that full introduction.
Well, you know how we do. We go back. From the Nevada, Utah Conference, the Youth Ministries Director, the very, very talented, innovative, and speaks truth to power, no holds barred. Please welcome Pastor Daryl Hoy.
Hello.
Hello, Pastor Hoy. How are you?
I'm excellent. How about you, Woody?
It's good to see you. What a smile. Isn't this just a good welcome, ever welcome? Blessed Sabbath day. That's some MV stuff. Amen, somebody. We're all the way from Orlando, Florida. We're happy to have a corporate executive, an efficiency and management and leadership guru, none other than Sharon Duncan McKay. Sharon, welcome to the broadcast.
Hi, happy to be here.
Happy to have you. And last but not least, we need some mission integration. And what better place to find mission integration than the talented, outspoken, well-researched mind, Pastor Jason O'Rourke from Colorado. Dr. O'Rourke, welcome to the program. Come off mute, my brother. We want to hear you. We really want to hear you.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here.
We didn't pay you all this money for you to come on mute. You know, we paid you a whole lot of money. We didn't want to be on mute. Now, we're here talking about engaging Generation X and Millennials with regards to regional conferences and us. And what I wanted to do is to get your perspectives as to what you see are the strengths of regional conferences. What do you see as the strengths of regional conferences? You know, I love this gender equity. Don't y'all see that on here? This is great. This is great. And I want you to know why this is important as we talk about it. This is Faith Weekend for the census. And we really want to promote not just voter registration, but because of the coronavirus, the census has been delayed. So please make sure whatever city that you're listening to across this country, United States of America, that you're counted, your neighbors are counted as it relates to the census, because that means money coming to your community. And then last but not least, we want to make sure you're registered to vote. And we'll talk about that throughout the broadcast. Pastor Hoy, kick us off. What are the strengths as you see it, having worked in a regional conference? What are the strengths?
Well, I believe that God created regional conferences to do what the church was not willing to do, and that is to include all. I think God meant for regional conferences not to be imitators, but innovators. And the goal is to welcome leadership from all people. I don't know if we've quite lived up to that yet, but there's that hope that we will live up to it. And again, it's that inclusiveness, it's being innovators, it's taking little and allowing God to make much. And I think our focus has got to be leadership development. We've got to develop women leaders. We have to develop young leaders. We have to develop leaders of different ethnicities, and also have a heart for the community other than strictly preaching the Bible, but having a heart for the community, understanding that we are whole people. And so encouraging holistic ministry. That's what I believe the purpose of regional conferences are.
Thank you so much, Pastor Hoy. Dr. Jason O'Rourke, can you give us some comment with regards to that? The strength of regional conferences from your perspective.
I think the strength of regional conferences is their ability, their ability to reach back into the community. Within 3 generations of our education system, you have moved, a demographic, you've moved an economic demographic, but that's about it. And what I mean by that is most of us are not too far removed from for the rest of us that struggle. And I think that our close connection to that, especially at this time, is a tremendous asset that actually needs to be nurtured. We have people that are actually doing this right now. I'll talk about that later. But reaching back, our close affiliation and association with the people that are actually dealing with police brutality and other forms of injustice, we can reach back with a practical and theological gospel experience and really do some good. So I think that is a strength of the regional conferences. With the people that are actually dealing with police brutality and other forms of injustice, we can reach back with a...
Hello, and thank you so much, Pastor O'Rourke. Claudia Allen, give us your take on the strength of regional conferences.
Man, so I think one of the greatest things about regional conferences is representation. Within regional conferences, you have leadership representation, you have pastoral representation, but you also have curricular representation, right? So, we can have magazines like Message or like the Regional Voice that really spotlight and showcase the ministry, the talents, and the gifts of Black Adventists. And I think that that's critical as individuals seek to be in community and seek to figure out what does it mean to be Black and be Adventist? How can I be Black and be Adventist? And so I think that the space for representation really allows that.
Woody, you're muted.
Woody, you're on mute.
Sorry about that, Dr. Carlton Bird. Dr. Bird, we've seen you over the last few weeks being very interactive and engaged with regards to your church, not just hitting the Huntsville community, but really hitting all across America, 10,000 live viewers across 3 platforms. So you are really the pulse of the Black Seventh-day Adventist Church in North America. You've had April Ryan, you've had Reverend Al Sharpton. Today you had Senator Doug Jones. Tell us from your vantage point, what do you see as the strength of regional conferences?
Thank you, Brother Woods. I want to say that I echo all of what our other panelists have said relative to the benefit of regional conferences. I want to speak to 2 things. One of the strengths, I would dare say, is leadership development. If regional conferences had not been created and formed, there are many great leaders who have served the Seventh-day Adventist Church and served our communities, whose leadership gifts would not have been realized or even known. And so there's been a great amount of leadership development within the regional conference leadership structure and whatnot. And we're still developing those leaders. I would dare to say that all of us in this panel and also the other guests that will share this afternoon, they too have been brought up within the regional conference structure. And with that, we can see we're having leaders developed among our conferences, regional conferences. We have seen the benefit of that for all people. Number 2, I would like to say that with regional conferences, it has also fostered evangelistic work among people of color. In the 1940s to the present day, there has been an intentional focus, or strategic focus, to reach people with the gospel of Jesus Christ, specifically in our urban areas. Where other churches have departed, other institutions have departed our urban areas, we still find a regional conference presence in our urban areas here in the United States. And so with that, we have a distinct niche, if you will, to be able to go in and evangelize, whether that's public evangelism, friendship evangelism, health evangelism, education evangelism, whatever means of evangelism. Regional conferences and our structures have supported going in our urban areas and sharing the gospel of Jesus Christ. And what can we say later? Hundreds of thousands of members in our 9 regional conferences. To God be the glory. So I want to say not just one strength, but 2 strengths: leadership development, and then number 2, the focus on evangelism, specifically within urban areas.
Thank you, Dr. Bird. Appreciate those insights with regards to evangelism and the strengths of regional conferences. Last but not least, Sharon McKay from the Great Southeastern Conference. We want to hear from you.
Well, Buddy's from the Great Southeastern Conference too.
Buddy, all right.
What I would say is within the regional conferences, I think the thing that we really contribute is worship diversity. Especially those of us who grew up in a Caribbean culture where, while we were Black, a lot of our worship was on more of a Eurocentric perspective. I think within North America, the regional conferences have really given us that opportunity to broaden our worship diversity and give us some other choices in that vein. And I also echo everything everyone else on the panel has said around growth and evangelism. There is a certain fervor within our community for evangelism, and there's a lot more comfort, I think, with just sharing the gospel. And I think within the North American division, I will dare say that the regional conferences has been the number 1 contributor to the growth of the Adventist Church within North America. And I think that has been something that we have one of the strengths that we have brought to the Adventist Church and continue to bring. And I dare say that growth is also being fueled by the fact that we have embraced worship diversity. So it gives people another option as they come into the church versus that one style.
Thank you, Sharon. Appreciate those insights. As part of our distinguished panel, one of the things we wanted to take the opportunity is to bring some special guests to share different perspectives and then to have you provide feedback before we open it up to the audience for questions. For those of you that are listening, whether you're on Facebook or on YouTube or on the Lake Region Conference YouTube page, the Lake Region Conference Facebook page, and the Conscience and Justice Council YouTube page, if you ask some questions, we promise we'll get them answered. We might not get all of them, but we're going to go through and make sure we go through plenty of questions. Our first guest is Dr. Ifeoma Kwesi. She teaches at the School of Religion at the Oakwood University, and we're happy to have her. Her father, Dr. Frank Hale, is a former president of our beloved institution, Oakwood College, Oakwood University. But many of you have started reading as a result of the George Floyd case and the aftermath in terms of Seventh-day Adventist Church and what should we do with regards to regional conferences. If you notice in the Seventh-day Adventists in the Civil Rights Movement, if you notice in written by Samuel London, or in Protest and Progress, written by Dr. Calvin Rock, Dr. Kwesi's father, Dr. Frank Hale, was featured prominently in that book as the chairman of the Laymen's Leadership Council. And as a daughter that grew up in the civil rights era, and as a professor who is teaching millennials, we thought she would be the perfect guest to talk about her father's work, talk about intergenerational leadership between clergy and laity during the civil rights movement, how that worked to the Black Lives Matter too, and this engaging discussion. So without further ado, let's turn it over to Dr. Ifeoma Kwesi. Dr. Kwesi, thank you for coming on our broadcast.
Thank you for the opportunity. I'm really glad to be a part of this wonderful conference. And I want to just put the Layman's Leadership Conference in context. When I was 12, about to turn 13, my father asked me to apply to Mount Vernon Academy. We were living in Wilberforce, Ohio at that time. And we were certain that there would be difficulty with my finding a roommate. And so we asked Burl and Bonnie Scott if their daughter Erica could be applying at the same time so that we could be roommates at Mount Vernon Academy. Well, we both received a form letter with directions on how to get to Pine Forge. And at that point, my father then asked us to apply to all of the surrounding states that had Adventist academies. We were denied admission to all of them. Some of them said, well, we don't want to accept anyone from outside of our conference. Others said, we have a quota system that's basically filled until Jesus comes. Others were just a flat out, no, we don't accept basically your kind. And so at that point, my father, Burl Scott, Erica's father, and Milas Martin got together to form the Layman's Leadership Conference. Their decision to make this laity-based was because they understood the kinds of backlashes that could result if clergy were at the forefront of bringing the General Conference and the Seventh-day Adventist Church in general to deal with the racist policies and practices that were very common, not just in terms of admission into Adventist academies, but throughout the entire institutional system, even in terms of hiring, promoting. Lucy Byards had already died as a result of their realizing at the point of her registration that she wasn't white as they had thought. So this resulted in the General Conference of 1962 in San Francisco, bringing it not necessarily to a head, but to the attention of the Adventist Church at large. The president, who was our figure at that time, had refused to meet with my father and the leaders of LLC. He had refused to respond to letters that had been written. And if there's one thing that Adventists don't like, it's number one, withholding of tithe, and number two, bad publicity. And so they went to the press in San Francisco. And that was the catalyst that changed any number of policies, practices to some degree, but as you can well imagine, hearts were not changed. I ended up attending Indiana Academy, and Erica went to Mount Vernon. We never should have split up. Both of us caught it. I caught it so badly that when I got home from Indiana Academy, I was clear that if white people, white Adventists in particular, were going to heaven, I didn't need to be there. And so it took a long time for me to reconcile with the Seventh-day Adventist Church after that kind of an experience. I'm wearing a t-shirt right now that says, all lives matter can't be true until Black Lives Matter. And so I was involved from a very early age in the civil rights movement as a result of being the poster child for the LLC during that time. And it has been a lifestyle issue to be a champion for social justice.
I want to thank you for your presentation and bring our panelists back in. But one thing that struck me, you told me this happened in the 60s, but in the 50s, Brown versus Board of Education, they said separate but equal was unconstitutional. But yet in the Adventist Church, if I'm hearing you correctly, separate but equal was still deemed constitutional. So instead of being the head, we were the tail, as it looks like in terms of desegregation of our institutions, especially our education institutions. And it was very interesting because in Dr. London's book, he talks about how the Attorney General had to call Southern Union for another case that was taking place down there in 1965. And Dr. Rourke, I know you're familiar with that, so I want you to comment about that, and then we can get into a broader discussion with Dr. Kwesi.
Well, there's actually a website that deals with this. An individual from Southern has posted this up, and he has chronicled the entire desegregation process at Southern, and it got so bad that the Southern individual, when they were called by the Attorney General, they said, "Well, give us some time," and he said, "You don't have any time. Like, if you don't do this and do it quickly, you will lose your tax exempt status." And sure enough, wouldn't you know it, they got a call back within a week. "Hey, you'll be glad to know that we have changed our policies, and everybody's now included." And having said that, there was an individual in the exact same article that I read, and it's online, where he was a Black individual at that school, and our Caucasian brethren that were there, they came to him and they said, "We didn't do this willingly. We did not follow this. The Spirit of God did not lead us to this. We did this because we were coerced by the state." So I think that we should, I think we need to rest with that for a moment, in the sense of, as much as Adventists love to tout separation of church and state, we need to be very clear that the integration that we have experienced was not done by the Holy Ghost. It was because our church lacked the integrity to treat all people as brothers and sisters in Christ, and the state had to come in and enforce what the church should have initiated.
Wow.
Have mercy, have mercy. Panelists, anybody would like to offer some feedback as we interact with Dr. Kwesi at this time?
Yeah, I'm really grateful for what Dr. O'Rourke just said and what Dr. Kwesi just said. I think the thing that really stood out for me in her presentation was where she was breaking down how they had to actually go to the press. I think that a lot of times we think that we can deal with things internally, and that if we apply enough internal pressure that will create the change that we need. But what we see historically is that we actually need to apply some external pressure, some non-Adventist, as Dr. O'Rourke explained, state pressure. Particularly when you're dealing with individuals that, like Dr. Kwesi explained, are not interested in having a conversation about holding tithe dollars. But we really need to think that, particularly as, we have this conversation about what it means to, or if we're going to merge the state conferences or the regional conferences, right? I think that we really need to be thinking if the Spirit of God is not moving this kind of integrity, and it is only external policies, then we need to be thinking what needs to stay and then what needs to be adjusted. And when we're talking about making very real structural change for policies and practices at the GC level, we need to consider the very practical ways that we are going to apply pressure that is not, within the system. That's the nicest way I can say that.
Woody.
Sharon?
I would love to ask the question because, as I've listened to a couple of Dr. Bird's sermon over the past couple of weeks, where he's talked about some of the challenges that he has faced since he has participated in the current social justice movement. And I hear what Dr. Kwesi has said about what happened to her even back in the 60s. And then I'm also hearing what Dr. O'Rourke is saying about what has happened at Southern. Have we really evolved at all? Because we're talking about the 60s, probably even the 60s or 70s, what occurred at Southern, to what is happening today, as those who have decided to participate is still facing backlash. And the question I would ask is as a church, have we actually evolved?
And I just want to clarify what Dr. O'Rourke is talking about is what happened at Southern Union College. Is that right?
Yes.
And the case I'm talking about in 1965 dealt with a high school, one of our high schools, just so we're clear. So these are two different incidences. It just happened in Southern Union in terms of the conference, not the institution, the school. So Dr. O'Rourke was talking about the university. I was talking about the academy that was in the Alabama-Mississippi conference that is now called the Gulf States Conference. that's identified in Dr. London's book. So just want to make sure we're all talking about different incidents. Dr. Quasey's testimony, Dr. Rourke with regards to Southern Union, and then what I was talking about from Dr. London's book that took place in the Alabama-Mississippi Conference, now known as the Gulf States Conference, in Southern Union, the religious union starts with that. Dr. Bird.
Yes, thank you. I want to respond to Sharon McKay's question, have we evolved and whatnot? I think the statement was made by Will Smith not too long ago. Racism has not just begun, it's being now recorded. And so I think that what is happening now in 2020 is just becoming more overt, if you will. I think that sometimes there were some who thought it was just covert still, even within our church ranks. It is now overt. And the sad thing about it is when you speak up and speak out about it, as I am learning, and I'm okay with that, there are some people who think it's just diabolically wrong to speak out. Why are you disrupting things? Why are you causing disunity? But no one says that they're wrong when they're doing something that is promoting privilege or systematic racism or not. But when you speak out against it, you're wrong. And so to answer your question about evolving, it's just becoming more known. Our young people can record it better. We have greater access to it because of technology. It was there then, it's here now, and we've got to deal with it. And we've got to ask those tough questions, have some hard discussions, and we've got to continue to speak up and speak out and call it to the attention of people. I was saying something in my sermon today. Why did it have to take the death of George Floyd, Ahmaud Arbery, and Breonna Taylor for now people to become aware of something that has been in existence and is still existing? Did people have to lose their lives? And so the reality is we're still dealing with it. It's alive and well. Unfortunately, it is even within our church ranks. And we have a responsibility. We have a God-ordained calling to call it out, to speak against it, and rise up against it. Because the reality is no one's going anywhere. We're not going to heaven until we deal with this.
I want to jump in.
Let me also say that when you look at the voting records of 2016, it is amazing that not just evangelicals voted for number 45, but so many white Adventists were a part of that number. And to be able to embrace the very blatant racist perspectives and attitudes and words that he has used to create disunity, to further flame or fan the flames of racism that were under ground before, but have now come to the fore, so that we can know for sure that even within our church, we have a long way to go to be anything like Christ.
Yeah, I want to jump in and say I agree with you that racism is still alive and well, but I do think we have progressed. I don't want to discount the sacrifices of Dr. Quasey, the late Congressman John Lewis. I mean, those people have sweat, blood, and tears, and gone through things so that we can move forward. And whereas we might not be where we want to be, I can definitely see that there has been progress. And I want to keep in mind, Ella Jo Baker was a civil rights leader, and she said, "We who believe in freedom cannot rest." And so I think there will always be that struggle. And I think we owe it to future generations to continue to struggle, to continue bringing people together of different races, having dialogue, and as Dr. Bird said, speaking up against injustice, moving people forward. But I don't want us to say that we haven't come, far. I'm excited. We have a new African-American North American Division president. Now, I think the last time we've had an African-American as the North American Division president was 30 years ago with Dr. Charles Bradford. But the fact that here in 2020, Dr. Bryant is here, I think that's progress. And I don't want to sugarcoat it. I'm not saying there isn't racism. I'm not saying that Black people aren't still dying because of racism, but I think we are moving forward, and not just Black and white, but other races as well.
I definitely agree with you, Pastor Dario Hoy. I do. I think the thing that stands out for me is I feel like we're also in a time, though, where the game changes. So while individuals like Dr. Kwesi and John Lewis and individuals like that have made sacrifices that have allowed us to progress, we are also dealing with a system that always changes the rules to the game the moment that we get one notch higher, right? So it's like 1 minute we're playing checkers, and then in the middle of the game when we start winning, they want to switch it up and we're playing chess. That's a completely different game. And so I think that ultimately kind of puts us as Black people in a situation where we're now always having to adjust, and we're always kind of one mark behind. And I feel like that doesn't exist exclusively within America at large. I really feel like that exists within the system and structure of our church. Every single time that, now I'm allowed, like I didn't, probably the only person here that didn't go to Oakwood. Now I'm allowed to go to and graduate from Andrews, right? I'm allowed to eat in that cafeteria with white people. And at one point that wasn't possible. In the 70s, somebody was burning crosses on the front of Lamson Hall. Absolutely. So now that doesn't necessarily happen in 2019, okay, that's fine. But if I get up and say anything in PMC about Black Lives Matter, I'm more than likely going to get several emails, several written statements about how I'm a communist and how I'm a this, right? So it's like the game only alters itself. It is not that we've progressed and moved to something else, but it is that they simply find new ways to express old ideas. And I think that's why it's so critical that regional conferences be very explicit and overt voices against the racism that is within our church, as well as is within our country at large. I'm gonna be that person today, probably just because I'm tired and I've been doing so much. So I'm gonna just be that person. But I just really feel like regional conferences have not fully stood up and been as expressive and explicitly against racism in our church or in the country at large as well as they could have. And I think that if we are going to really see change and growth in our church, then we need our regional conference leadership to speak to these very real social issues in very real and explicit ways, but then also hold GC leadership accountable when it comes to various policies and practices and start to tear down the very real structural things in this church that continue to disenfranchise and discriminate against people of color.
I would tend to agree that we have evolved, but I think in some regard, for example, myself, I had the opportunity to be one of the first Black females that ever worked in the finance department of Florida Hospital. If I go there now, 20 years later, we have Black women in a lot of different roles within the finance department. So I can see within the church in certain areas we have evolved. But I think for me, what is most disturbing is when I hear Dr. Kwesi talk about that she had to go to the press to do certain things. A lot of the tactics that was used against us for racist purposes is being used by the regional conference against us just to squelch feedback, period. So I think we have taken a lot of the lessons that we have learned from white people that is holding us down, and we have broadened that out to even the broader ministry. So we don't have a lot of diversity of thought because we will kill it. If there is something that we are disgruntled about, there's not a place for us to have a discussion. So it's very difficult for you to become the champion in the public for racial and social justice when you have not exercised equality and fairness even within your own structure. And so we have to really start reconciling with ourselves, right and right. So right is always right and is not always based on race, because we tolerate a lot of things against Black people from Black people that we would never tolerate from white people. And we can't go out and be a marcher and start demanding our conferences put on justice when they haven't been fair in their own world. And we have to start dealing with that in a broader sense. So while we have evolved and we have done some things differently, we have still used those same tactics to keep us down within our own group. And we have to deal with that as well as we start talking about how we're going to move forward into that next level of being a voice for justice.
So you're saying the oppressed have become the oppressor?
In some regards, I believe that.
But I mean, I want to follow back up on what Claudia said. I don't want to discount it, but it just seems like our voices have been quiet. And traditionally, Dr. Kwesi has highlighted it. It's been well documented that the church follows the world when it comes to discrimination. And the church has constantly followed the world, whether it was the Jim Crow laws, whether it was post-Reconstruction, Jim Crow's civil right. The church has never been that voice, that troubler of Israel, that disturbance, we say aher in the Hebrew language, the disturbance, stirring things up. That is not the church, but yet that is biblical. You know, we say Nathan said to David, "Thou art the man." John the Baptist talk about, "Oh, generation of vipers." Elijah saying, "I'm not the troubler of Israel. You are Ahab." And why are we afraid? You know, I want to get back to her. And I hear where people are coming from, because I'm not saying we haven't made progress. I'm not saying we haven't made first. But I have a Generation Z kid. Some of you have Generation Zs. And what happens when they tell you, like Representative AOC said, just because you have a wife and just because you have a daughter doesn't mean you can talk to me any old kind of way.
Right.
So therefore, what do we say? You know, when our church is not taking the leadership, when people are getting killed in the streets, what do we say when we're last in terms of integrating our schools? What do we say when Dr. Bird and others are told, if you say this again, you won't get any higher in this church? It's no different than what happened in the regional retirement system. They told them, if you go through with this, you will not get any higher. So, I mean, I really want to have this conversation because there's an expectation that we're just going to just gloss over stuff and not speak truth to power. And that's not what any of you are about, because I know you. And there's a reason why you're on the show. So I'm not trying. I mean, I want us to be respectful. Don't get me wrong. But I don't want to discount stuff. And Claudia brought out some good points. But if you heard the context of what I just shared, you know, what do we say? Because we are the church. I'm not looking to the institution to give me permission to speak up and do what God has told me to do, which is right in his word. But if we don't do it, we're going to lose another generation, because we are the sons, we are the parents of the millennials or the Generation Z, and they're looking to us to make a difference. Dr. O'Rourke.
So, one, the church initially was the troubler in Israel, and Professor Kevin Burton and Benjamin Baker have adequately talked about that on other sites, and they've spelled that out. The switch happens particularly in history when we start baptizing Southerners, and it gets pretty bad after that. 1888 happens. Benjamin Baker has documented this. When they had the 1888 message, A.T. Jones was righteousness by faith was so powerful that he said we need to do right by minorities. And so in rejecting 1888, it wasn't just cheap grace, it was equality they were rejecting. Move forward a little bit. Ellen White says we need to do better by Black people. Why don't you go have a vacation in Australia? So that happened. Now you come to the 1900s, and what happens in the 1900s? Kevin Burton has found out that the FBI came to the Adventist church and said, we don't like the way that you've done your lamb-like beast. So now you need to change it, or we're going to arrest you the way we did the Jehovah's Witness. And they changed it from a leopard-colored beast to a bison. And then now it looks like a little lamb with two horns. So what ends up happening is that you end up worrying about only religious liberty issues, and that's all you talk about. You don't talk about the violations of the horn of republicanism, which is freedom, equality, and justice, right? To add to that, and then I'll be quiet. This is so Mark Knoll states in his book, Civil War as Theological Crisis. He says that because the theologians did not actually solve the slavery crisis, they actually made it greater. Grant and Lee had to be the two great prophets that handled it, and Grant won. Afterwards, the religion was empty of social capital, and everyone's religion went private. And so at that point, people went materialism, individualism, and industrialism. And that is the dominant American culture since Civil War. Move now forward, Dr. Bird, and now we're in the 1960s in integration. What are we integrating into? To eating at the counter, to sitting in the front of the bus, to being treated fairly at the front? Sure, we integrated into that. But we also integrated into individualism, industrialism, and materialism. So we integrated into all those things. So now people like myself, I don't live where my family used to live. I know exactly where I used to live. I live out here. I'm here. This is where my job took me, right? And more people like me now no longer live where the rest of us live. So all the education and all that other stuff has left the hood. So what happens now is that all of our evangelism, in the process of that happening, all of our evangelism is being told to us by theologians that don't look like me. And so now when you have that, listen, this is what Calvin Rock said, 1984, his PhD dissertation. He says this, and I will be quiet. Since theological contours of Adventism have been provided by white and not black theologians, it is not surprising that Adventism's political perspective has little relevance for the minorities within its membership. Black Seventh-day Adventists have basically two options. They can accept a foreign word, God's word to Caucasian theologians, or they can accept as his word to them, or they can hear and find the word as it relates to them specifically. Such a word is what black theology is all about. Black Adventists must come to understand that there's no such thing as plain theology, which comes to one unconditionally by the hearer's social perspective. So what we have been taught is that theology just falls from the sky, neuter and divine, and that's not true. It's absolutely not true. And so what we need is a methodology and a theological perspective on interpretation that is practical, that is us, and that is Adventist. That is what is needed. Because right now, all that we've been able to do is imitate what we've integrated into. I rest.
Wow.
Wow. Dr. Bird, I see.
Yeah.
But Dr. Bird, let me let you comment.
Okay, thank you, Dr. O'Rourke. Praise God for you. Now, I want to just throw something in from a practical perspective. We're talking about leadership in regional conferences and whatnot. And I hope I don't commit political suicide by this statement. The same thing we're telling our young people, we're talking about young people in regional conferences. The same thing we're telling our young people right now with the larger community. Go out and peacefully protest. Go out and march. Go out and hold our leaders accountable. Go out and vote. Vote them out if we have to. We're talking about our civic leaders. Then some of those same things we're probably going to have to apply to our leadership. If not, we die. So the same way we're saying, do in the larger setting, we're going to have to do within our own setting as it relates to leadership. And that's not personal. That's not personal. But we the same methods we're using in the larger community, we got to do within our own community. So that's just a practical way of how young people today, in terms of leadership and regional conferences, how they can be involved. Hold them accountable. Go vote. Do what you got to do. Because the reality is we'll come down to constituency meetings where we're electing persons and we're voting persons. And in my pastoral leadership and in my experience, it's hard to get young people to consider even being delegates. And so with that, we're talking about change. If you want to change, you got to change the people. With that, that's just a practical way when we talk about leadership. And I'm not saying, oh, Bird is now saying go vote people. That's not what I'm saying. Just saying the same ways, the same demonstrations we engage in on a local civic level, you have to do that as well within our structure.
I think that's historic as well. When you look at the Bible, the church as a whole never was doing what God wanted them to do. When you look at the book of the Kings and Chronicles, you always had kings who did what was right in their own sight and those who did what was right in God's sight. As you look at the church, God sent prophets because we weren't doing what was right. The majority was never doing what was right. When Jesus, seeing him in the Gospels, he always preached against the Pharisees and the Sadducees and the religious leaders who were not doing right. And the call has always been you and your connection with God, do what's right and help others do what's right. You know, the social justice text in the Bible, and I don't like the word social justice, I think it's simply justice. God is telling us as individuals and as a community that he wants us to treat other people right. I think the more we increase in goods as people of color, I think the more we get educated, I think the more we get things, the less likely we are to be concerned about other people. And I also think and as Black people, I understand, we think a lot black and white. But I think God wants us to also have a larger view outside of just Black and white, because there are lots of races. And I think God is calling regional conferences in particular to do what we had not done as a church. And I wholeheartedly agree with Dr. Bird that if we have leaders who are not doing what they should, then it's time for a change. But it also means that we have to be engaged. It's easy to put comments. It's easy to listen in and put comments. But when the rubber hits the road is where it is. It's not easy to tell your leadership XYZ. But when you have it in your heart that this is what God wants you to say, you say it. And you keep doing it, whether you're heard or not, you keep doing it. And then you pass it on to the next generation that we have to be vocal about what is right.
I just want to share one quick story real quick. There is a picture of two juxtaposed leaders that has been going around social media this week. Two very big evangelists in Adventism. One is an African-American man named Dr. Carlton Byrd, who's on the panel tonight, leading our Black Lives Matter protests down south. When that first happened, he got a lot of mixed reviews on social media in the little comment section, right? That's where the people live, in the comment section, all right? And so everybody was down for Dr. Byrd marching the Black Lives Matter protest, but then he also got a lot of hate mail in the protests, in the comment section, statements and letters and all this other kind of stuff, because this big face, this big name, this big evangelist is leading in the front a Black Lives Matter protest rally. He not once said all lives matter. He was very clear. Sit his picture right next to Doug Batchelor, who just recently was in Alaska with a host of white men and boys holding up their various guns of various sizes. They are out there in the woods. Doug is in the middle holding his Bible close to his chest, and the rest of them are holding their guns. And the caption is, our right to bear arms. Dougie has yet to get any bad press for being in the hills with these white men and their guns. So I think that the other reality of our church is that there is a politics that we are inherently uncomfortable dealing with, that speaks directly to the living racism that is within the very bloodstream of our church. For one man to participate in a peaceful protest declaring the value of Black lives, and for that to be denigrated, disrespected, and for him to receive any kind of hate mail in regards to it. And then a white man, a white evangelist, can go in the hills of Alaska and sit there and take pictures next to guns. He doesn't get one bad hate letter. I think that we're having a conversation about race and racial politics our church oftentimes does not want to discuss. And when you really look at the history of republicanism and the Democratic Party, I know we don't want to touch it. This is what I'm here for. There is inherently within that racial tensions, and those tensions and those parties exist and operate within our church. And I truly feel that it is time for our church, our leaders, our millennials, I'm calling out to all of us, that we really do take up these opportunities, as Dr. Byrd has just said, to be delegates, so that we can go to a variety of constituency sessions, whether that be at the conference, union, NAD, or GC level, so that we can remove individuals out of positions that are not valuing our lives.
I have transfer membership slips for everyone on the panel. Just let me know when and where and how to send them.
I appreciate it.
Dr. Quincy, I know we had 7 minutes for this discussion, but it got hot and it got real, and we have lived up to the billing. And but to wrap this up, how do we ensure intergenerational leadership, like your dad did with you? One. And then two, what are the right tactics today? Because I know people probably screamed when they heard withholding tithe dollars and saw it all in the comments. But what are the right tactics today so that the church leadership not just listens, I should say, here's millennials and Generation Z, but also engages and responds and is held accountable by their constituency that's elected them?
I think we're doing part of it. We're having dialogue, and we're
hold on just a second, Pastor Hoy.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, Dr. Kwesi, are you on mute?
I want to go back to I want to go back to the historical context of the Laymen's Leadership Conference being specifically lay-led, so that clergy would not be disenfranchised, or in other words, kept from moving through the system. I want to also look at the young people that were involved in the civil rights movement. The list is actually quite long, whether you're looking at Ruby Bridges or Linda Brown in the Brown versus Board of Topeka. John Lewis was a young man at that point, the Little Rock Nine, the Birmingham Children's Crusade. And so what I'm saying is that while it is true that we're in a different era, there are so many things that have not changed. And it is young people, it's been college students, it's been those with a sense of why are we still dealing with this crap, that will take the horns and they will press this issue forward within the church and within society at large. And so I'm looking at your generation to be willing to speak truth to power. I'm ready to see, the mantle be passed. I'm ready to see, as in a relay race, the baton to be passed, so that which has been started, because we're all standing on the shoulders of those who've come before us, those who have given their lives, those who have been imprisoned, those who have just been lost in the struggle. I think of the 3 civil rights workers in Mississippi who, whose lives were lost and for a long time were never found. The Emmett Tills. And so young people are going to have to be the ones who speak truth to power. It can come, as been said, by the vote. It can be in mass demonstrations. I don't support a policy of violence in any way, but I do think that until we come together, and divide and conquer has been the tool that has been used to keep us separated, to keep us down forever, whether it's been on the continent of Africa or here in the United States, and it still works. And so we have to recognize the strategy that continues to oppress us, and we need to come together. We need to recognize, as has been said, those many values from the larger society that have been embraced by our denomination, even within our race, as has been said, we oppress each other, such that we can begin to not just speak truth to power, but speak it in a way that changes the hands that hold the power.
Thank you so much, Dr. Kwesi. Any final thoughts? We're trying to get intergenerational leadership. I think we've identified all the issues from AOC this week to what Claudia hit about the evangelistic pictures. I want to, close with a caption. And I think Dr. Bird hit it too. Look, it's good for y'all to be out in the streets, and we should be in the streets. Portland's a hot mess right now with this federal stuff going on. We should be in the streets, but what good is it if we're woke in the streets and sleep in our church, and yet the same thing is happening in both places? Amen. I think Dr. Bird captured that, and he was very professional, respectful, and so we have to look out and have his back just in case there's a backlash with regards to it. But folks, this is really what's happening, and you can't say young people aren't here. We have Tiffany Llewellyn, who's been commenting, saying, Generation X and Millennial, we're here. You know, she founded. She's the president of Advent for Social Justice. You can't say the Generation X and Millennials aren't here. They're commenting tonight. They're right here on the screen. So you can't say we're not here. We're here.
We're here.
We're serving in your churches.
Your
We're
mic,
not in the seat of
Dr.
power
Report,
in
and
a lot
then
of places.
we'll go to Sharon, and then we'll go to Daryl, and we'll close it up because I know we got another guest. But Dr. Quincy, you lit the fire, so we'll blame you because you're not in our generations. They need somebody to blame.
Thank
Dr.
you.
O'Rourke.
Yes.
Firstly, I just want to greet Dr. Quasi.
Hey, Jason.
All right. I think you hit it on the head, Pastor Woods. In this, there are Gen Xers and Millennials that are already doing things.
That's right.
And they need to be acknowledged, empowered, and freed to do what they're doing. Tucson Antoine Knight, as soon as he graduated, went to Detroit and has made a massive impact. Right? Tiffany Llewellyn and her whole team are engaged in, they've created something that up until this point has never existed, right? Dr. Julian Johnson is in Florida every Wednesday at Friday night. He has his Built to Thrive network thing talking about resilience, mental health, and all this other stuff. There are a host of people that are doing things, and they're doing it on their own. And the reason why they're doing it on their own is because they're frustrated with the system we have.
That's right.
So I don't even necessarily know if they need to be incorporated into the system. They just need to be empowered prophetically to be who they are.
They are, yeah.
Let them do their thing. Because even as Dr. Quasi said, the lay people led because the pastors could have got a backlash. Period. They led. And in the day of her father, Pastor Elder Hale, they led because the pastors would have got a backlash. So if the lay people are leading now, let them lead. Let them have it. Have it. Because until our theologians start doing, help me God, until our theologians begin to do some Black theology, they are in no place to say anything to Black people. No place. They can say nothing until you say Jesus is a Black man to Black people, and he incorporates everybody else into that melanated group. Until you can say these things, because that's truth. Until you understand what Dr. Rock is talking about in his dissertation, you really have nothing to say. Because if you say what we've been saying, it's only from one perspective, and it's not ours.
I just want to highlight the late evangelist Randy Stafford, his wife, put a comment. Deborah Stafford said, "I love this with all of the panel participants. Don't mince words." Sharon, you're up next.
So the one thing I wanted to read was Matthew 23, where it says, "Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees and hypocrites, for you tithe mint and dill and cumin and have neglected the weightier matters of the law, justice and mercy and faithfulness. These you ought have done without neglecting the other." And even in the fundamental gospel of who God is, justice and mercy was never separated from the gospel of who he was. And I think for us as believers, we have to understand that the ability to stand up to truth to power have to be something that we have to be comfortable with. And to Dr. Bird's point around needing for a leadership change, the system is rigged against us. There's no if or ands about it. It doesn't matter who you send in the room in the back, if the room in the back is already set before the door even opens. So there's a lot of systematic changes of things that we need to change, and we could send the Millennials and the Gen Xers into the room, but the system is already rigged for who we want to put in there. And there's a lot of structural changes that need to happen within the regional conferences for us to actually see any real change from actually holding people accountable. We have people in office who has failed at their church, but become a president. They haven't done a good job where they were, but we promote them, and we're not going to be able to make these changes unless we are willing to speak truth to power and not separate the gospel from the law and justice, so that it's one even spread across the board, and we're dealing with right as right all the time, and it's not based on who I am and who my friends are, and we already have everything already rigged. And I know that we have passion and we want to move it forward, and I believe that we can, but the entire system has to break in order for us to be able to move any of this forward.
Thank you. Pastor Hoy.
I think next steps are being the people that open the doors for our future generations. I think I'm privileged to be a youth director. And as a youth director, I have tried to give voice to young people. And that means that I have to be willing to do things differently. It means that I can't do things the same. And so it means that I'm teaching not only my African American, but all of the young people in my conference about voter registration. I'm teaching them about direct action organizing and understanding that change doesn't come just because we march, but we have to have strategies, and we have to understand power and how our world works, and understanding that if we truly want change, then we actually have to be that change. It means that I open the doors, that I stick my neck out, that I'm okay with my conference president being angry with me, or I'm okay with people not agreeing with me. I'm okay with even Black people not agreeing with me, because I think we only think in black and white. And I think that as we look at the Alpha generation, and as we look at Generation Z, we see the most racially diverse generation. When I look at my young people, they are not just Black and white. They are mixed of all races. And so it means that I even have to push the envelope with Black people and make Black people mad. And I'm okay with that. But it really just means, one, keeping God in the forefront, that God wants justice for all and mercy for all. And then two, not being afraid to speak up, and then opening the door for somebody else.
Thank you. Dr. Bird, I see you. I see your hands. I see your hands. Go ahead.
Okay. I just want to speak to action steps. It was said earlier about breaking the system and whatnot. I just want to say, and it kind of goes on the heels of what I said earlier. The church, our process and our structure is a microcosm of our greater country, okay? And the same way we have to educate our young people on how in our local municipality to make things change, we have to do that within the church. We've got to sit them down, help them understand this is the process in order to facilitate change. And we got to be intentional about that. That just doesn't happen. But I'm not going to sit back anymore and say, oh, it's just the system. It's just, no, it's wrong. It must change. And if the system is going to change, the people have to change. And so with that, we got to get our young people to understand how the system, how the structure works, prepare them. You're just educating, not necessarily trying to be political, just educating. People are smart. They know who and what to do, but they must be educated, our young people. So if we're talking about in downtown Huntsville, that a Confederate monument has to go. Well, the reality is we can't just go pull it. We got to figure out how do you do that. So we got to go down there. We got to vote those municipal people out so we can get the people in that will move the legislation so it will go. The church is the same way.
Same way.
You got to go in. You got to educate, let people know, show them how this process works. And, we used to sing in the MV. I know we call it AY now, but I still believe it's true. It only takes a spark to get a fire going.
Yes,
That's all it takes.
Yes,
and Brother Woods, I praise God for you, for this conversation. The people on this panel, outspoken, gift of tongue, intelligent. And I pray that this conversation is that spark to get a fire going. We have talked enough. No. Enough is enough. Let's get the job done. The same way we're talking about change in the United States with 45 in November, it's the same way change must take place in the church. Change policies, you got to change the people.
Well, Dr. Quasey, I hear an overwhelming unanimous opinion from this panel for you to restart the Layman's Leadership Council as an action step so we can educate not just Generation X and millennials, but everybody about how the church works and how they can take back their church as constituents and hold them accountable. Dr. Quasey, do you accept? Amen. Thank you, Jesus. God bless you. And thank you so much.
I would love to work with this group of people as the executive committee for the new Layman's Leadership Conference.
Well, you know what, Dr.
Come on,
Quasey?
Dr. Come on, Jason.
We're going to work
Come
with
on,
you. I'm
my
just going to
sisters
commit
and
them
my
all
brothers.
because I love them, and they'll just slap me on the head later. But we're going to commit all to work with you in reestablishing the Layman's Leadership Council, because that's an action step that we can do, as Dr. Bird said, not just educate in some part. We're talking about the whole country. There's no reason why we can't have these education forums. I mean, the blessed thing about COVID, we discovered technology, and now we can educate everybody. So let's take advantage of what God has given us. And we want to work with you, Dr. Quasey. And I know Elder Palmer is coming up after you, but you all have been there. You know what's there. And the thing is, your peers will listen to you better than they'll listen to us. So we know we need you.
Well, I just want to say that in addition to our needing to educate, we need to provide opportunities for leadership development within the youth that are coming behind us. So, yeah, I'm going to be quiet now.
Ladies and gentlemen, can we just give a round of applause to Dr. Quasey? And thank you so much, Dr. Quasey, for coming on our program.
For all of you. For all of you.
We appreciate you. And you know you can't get rid of me because you went to school with my parents, so you stuck with life. So I'll call you. And tell Prixie I said hello. Tell Prixie I said hello. All right.
She told me she's up.
Regional Conferences and Us, Perspectives from Millennials and Generation X. We want to thank Dr. Quasey for coming. Now we have another panelist. Folk, we're just going to go till we stop. My panelists, if you got issues, put it in the private chat. But we're getting so much feedback. Y'all on fire. Y'all are hot. I mean, I can't keep up with the comments as we're trying to run the show, but we want to thank Pastor Paul Young from the Lake Region Conference. He's our communications director, and he's the man behind the scenes, making sure the technology works. Want to thank him with regards to that. It's my distinct privilege and honor to bring on Elder Isaac Palmer. He is the former CFO for the Lake Region Conference and also the former vice president of finance for Oakwood College, now Oakwood University, a man ahead of his times. And we're just grateful for him to give us a perspective about the stats on finance and membership so that we as millennials and Generation X can have an education and then try to find some action steps on what we can do next as a result of this information. Without further ado, Elder Palmer, young folk, old folk, appreciate you. God bless you. Welcome to the program.
Hello, am I on?
You're on, Elder.
I want to say I've appreciated this hour listening to these eloquent people. I don't speak their same language. I speak numbers. And I want to confirm in numbers what they've all said about the success of regional conferences. I call it a spectacular success that we've had in the regional conferences. And do I have control of this here? It's not moving. Paul, my slides aren't advancing. Okay, look, this is a chart that shows in 1948, in blue here is the membership of the regional conferences, and then the rest of the North American division without including the regional conferences, 20,000 to 214,000. 70 years later, 2018, the regional conferences had 321,000. The rest of the division, 928. Now, this does not include the people in the regional conferences that were baptized in the regional conferences that have migrated to the state conferences. My guess, and I'd be willing to put money on this, that the number that have been baptized by the regional conferences is more like 700. The numbers would be like $500,000. Oh, I'm sorry, 500,000 members, and the number of white people in division would be less than that. Would be less than the 9 something. So instead of these numbers, as it is, it shows that the regional conference grew 16 times over those 70 years. The rest of the division grew 4 times. Elder Bryant, the new president of the North American division, and let me say this here about that. We can't get complacent when we have blacks in positions of leadership. Blacks sometimes lose black leadership. We don't want them to look bad. Now, I have nothing against him. He's a very fine person. He's an excellent person. He's had experience in the regional conferences, so he knows the facts. And this is a statement he made about the value of regional conferences. When indigent people are leading their own mission, that the mission goes forward at a greater level. And he says this is done this all over the world. On the West Coast, they did not organize regional conferences back in the 40s like happened on the East Coast. And a leader out there that knows the work says black membership growth would have been greater had black conferences been organized on the West Coast at the same time. Here's what has happened with the tithe. Since 48 to 2018, the tithe in 48 was about $1 million. It was now 192 million. In the rest of the division, it was 18 million. Now it's 800 and something. What we went from 6% in tithe to 22% in tithe, a good growth there. The regional tithe grew 176 times. The white tithe grew 49 times. I say that black conferences matter because black lives matter, because black churches matter, and black churches matter because black eternal lives matter. I need to slow down. I got so much to say. I'm just trying to rush myself. And no one does it as elder. No one does a better job of baptizing blacks than blacks. Understand this here. To understand the finances of regional conferences, you have to understand them in the context of the state conferences. You have to compare them. What I did back in 2018, I took our 9 regional conferences and I matched them with other conferences within the same unions that would give us about the same size. So in other words, the total regional conferences membership in 2018 was 321,000. I put together, and as it happens, it's 15 conferences that add up to 322 conferences. I'm sorry, I need to slow down. They add up to 322 members. So these things are very comparable. So it'd be interesting to look at how does the church look when these two groups have the same size. All through my presentation, you're going to see this equal M. That means equal membership. So it's going to be hard to remember that we're talking about the same size conferences when you look at some of these numbers. The membership, as you can see here, 321, 322. The tithe, 192 to 337. That's a difference of $145 million. That means that the 9 conferences with their 321,000 members had $145,000 less money to deal with in operating their conferences than these other conferences. It took 42 years for the white conferences, the state conferences, to get $1 billion more in tithe than the regional conferences. Now, this is not $1 billion. This is $1 billion more. So whatever we got in the regional conferences over those first 42 years, the state conferences that are the same size conferences, the same size group, they got $1 billion more. It took 14 years for them to reduplicate that $1 billion. It took 9 years for the next $1 billion, and the 7 years from 2013 to 2018 to hit a second billion, the fourth $1 billion. Now this is real money, and we're talking about the same size thing. Now that's the end of the good news. The bad news is this: the per capita in the regional work is $600 per member. Now that includes children, everybody that's on the books, divided by the total tithe. The per capita in the state conferences, same size conferences, is $1,046. It's a difference of $400 and some dollars. Now, let me show you how this plays out here. The per capita, it touches everything that the conferences does financially. Now, this has more numbers on it than you're going to probably be comfortable looking at. But let me show you this here. In red, it shows the membership at the top here. I just made these up. I just made up some numbers here to say each conference, each group, the regional and the state pairs, had 5,000 members. The per capita, like I said, 600,046. Then I went through and said, now what do conferences do with their money? Let's say that they bought 12 pastors, and let's say a pastor costs $100,000. That's $1,200,000 for the pastors. So both conferences, both groups of conferences had to pay that money. But now, because the per capita in the Black conferences is 600, they had to take the per capita of 2,000 members, to pay for those pastors. In the state conferences, they only had to take the per capita of 1,147. Now that's a big difference there. And all the way down here is, let's say they'll make some evangelistic efforts here. We're gonna have 5 evangelistic sessions at $750,000. The regional conference would have to take 1,250 per capitas. The state conferences would take 717. All the way down here, down to the bottom in the black here, you'll see that they start out with the same number of members at the top. Both of them have the same number of members, but they have different tithe, of course, because they have 57%. Now, for the Black conferences, the regional conferences have now used up 4,900 members of their per capita to buy this slate of goods here. They spent 98% of their per capita. They have left $55,000 in the bank. The state paired conferences have only spent 2,812 per capitas. They have $2,288,000 left to spend. And this happens in every Black conference and every state conference where this per capita is so great a difference. The per capita growth is the most stable thing in looking at the church finances. In 1948, the per capita for the regional conferences was 60% of the rest of the division. And for the rest of these paired conferences. In 66, it was 53%. In 59, it was 83, it was 59%. In 2000, 57. In 2018, it was 58. And I can just tell you, I've updated the numbers recently. By 2019, it had dropped back down to 56%. This is a truth in all finances. Low giving begins with low earnings. If we look at the per capita for the 9 regional conferences and stack them up against all the other conferences in the 6 unions that have Black conferences, you can see we bring up the bottom 7, and then there's Northeastern and Allegheny East, that the only ones that break out from, we are totally the bottom. That's if you look at the per capita. If you look at the size and membership, you see that we are the larger. We have large conferences, but that's what happens. Your per capita is low because you have large memberships, lower tithe. Here is why the tithe is low. The bottom line here is the percentage income gap. The regional constituency, the blacks in America, because of structural racism and other issues, earn 59% of what the whites earn in America. At the top here, when you see in the red here, we have 77% of the wealth, and compared to 100% of the whites. Black wealth is like, the average is $9,590. For white, it's $130,000. Now, here's what happens is, even with the money is different, even though the tithe is lower, the church has a policy that says the tithe percentages are shared with the higher organizations. The local conference is a storehouse. When you say bring your tithe into the storehouse, it all comes into the local conference. No tithe goes to the union, division, or general conference. It all starts in the local conference. Then the local conference sends their money, their percentage of their money, up to the division, the union, and GC. The division and the general conference get 15.1% of the tithe from every conference. The unions get 9%, and the Oakwood University from the blacks get 3%. The white conferences pay 3% to their local unions, union schools. So in the discussion that I'm having here, I'm only talking about the 24.1%. I don't think we want to touch the amount that goes to Oakwood. In fact, maybe should go there. But here is what happened here. This is in 2018 with our 192 million, their 337 million. When they paid their tithe percentages of $81 million, they had $256 million left. They had more after they paid their tithe percentages than the $192 million we had to start with. And that is, to me, is incriminating. And this shows it conference by conference here. This chart here shows in black, the black bars are the paired conferences. The black bars are the regional conferences without any tithe percentages. The gray bars are the state conferences after they've paid their tithe percentages. And so right across the board, they all have, except in Northeastern's case, they all have more tithe left than the regional conferences, even if they paid no tithe percentages. So here's the consequences of 70 years of this. Now this is not just 2018. This has gone on for 70 years. For 70 years. Our membership, of course, is 100% is equal. The tithe is 57%. The per capita, 57%. We have 59% of the number of churches that these paired conferences have. We have 64% of the pastors, and we have a higher member to pastor ratio than ours is 150% to their 100%. The schools, we have 88 schools to their 243. We have 30% of the number of schools. We have 38% the number of teachers. We have 33% the number of students. In boarding academies, we have one. These 15 conferences that are paired with us have 16. That we have 6%. Now, this is a list. I don't expect you to read this. This is a listing of the 88 schools that are in the regional conferences. And the same conference, now remember this is equal M, the same conference that we were compared to in size, this is their list of schools. Is that different or not? The regional, we have total employees. We have 44% of the number of total employees that they have. And this is why the regional retirement plan works, because we don't have as many people hired. We're not having to retire as many people. So the plan works for us when it will not work for them. Now, the issue with schools is a triple threat. because the black family that's making the 60% paycheck, they have to pay tithe out of that, which is 60% of the tithe that the state conferences get. When they pass the donation plate in the church, the 60% local offerings, they have to pay for when the church tries to have a church school, they can't pay for that church school because they have 60% less in their offering plates. And then the family budget has 60%. They can't pay for the tuition. And so this is a chart here of all the differences here. And I'm going to give a copy of this to Woody so he can make this available if anybody wants to see it. Now, over the years, for the last 70 years, the state paired conferences have taken in a tithe a gross of about $8 billion. The regional conferences have taken in about $4.6 billion. After you look at their tithe percentages, we had 2.9 left. They had 5.3. These numbers, I think, raise questions. And I think that we're going to have to learn to, as Einstein says, we're going to have to learn to dismantle old forms, to liberate their energy and build new structures. I don't think these numbers are satisfactory. And I'll say this here, this division in membership is about 50% Black, because the numbers I've shown you are just those in the Black conferences. There are numbers of Black people out on the West Coast. There are in some of these state conferences, like the Florida conferences, when they add up their Black and brown people, that Florida conference is one of the largest conferences in North America, and it's about 70% Black. The same thing can be said of the Potomac Conference. So when you add this up, I think the church is close to being 50% or better in Black, and think we need to take charge. That means you on this panel and the rest of our Black leadership. I'm finished. That's it.
Elder Palmer, thank you so much for such a rich discussion. You added a whole lot, a whole lot. And I've always appreciated your wit and wisdom. And as we bring the rest of our panelists back, we can see you on the screen as we bring you back. There's a lot to ponder. So we're looking to bring everybody back. We want to bring everybody back on this part of the discussion. I see the ladies are back. Sharon, we're going to kick it off with you as the finance person, management person, and provide your thoughts.
I think the big thought that's going through my mind is, from a financial perspective, a lot of those dollars that he presented on the white side are Black dollars, because in a lot of our cities, families who may have a little bit more means will transition to a white conference so that their children can get a little bit of education. In a lot of our cities, like for example, here in Orlando, we only have one academy, and it's not part of our regional conference. So as your children go to a certain age, you're going to transition your membership over to a state conference so that you can get a lower rate to attend one of their schools. And I think in a lot of our cities, we probably have a brain drain and a lot of Black dollars that's transitioning to the state side for that reason. And I think there's opportunities from a business perspective for us to, at the union level, to look how we better consolidate our resources at the regional level. The other thing that that bothers me a lot about our financial structure is the burden that's on the local church. We have a lot of conversation about tithe and it's trickling up. The bottom line is that the local church does not benefit from that in a direct way. Yes, we get probably discounts on insurance, and we have a lot of the subsidy on the educational side because they do cover a percentage of the teachers for those of us who have schools. But as you're talking about the fact that we're at the lowest socioeconomic standard and that we are already collecting a lower amount on the tithe side because of where we are, imagine the small amount that's left on a church budget after that. And then a lot of churches, the members pay their tithe, but they don't pay their budget. And there needs to be some equity in our structure as to how we bring some of that back down to the local church. I had the opportunity a few years ago to be a member of a church in a state conference. And when they distributed evangelism dollars, it was real easy. The union sent the funds, the conference made us aware that the funds was available, and we could do whatever we needed to do in evangelism, turn in the receipts, and we get a reimbursement. In the regional conference, it's a very complicated process to get evangelism money. And so there's a lot of inequities, I think, within the local church, the conference churches that we need to balance out. And we also have to look at the union level to figure out how we balance out the inequity in the education system, because from the Black side, a lot of our funding and our intellectual properties is floating over to the other side because everybody wants the best for their kids. And those are some of the choices that we're forced to make.
Well, it's difficult for regional conferences to compete. The money is just not there. In Miami, Florida, the state conference school gave their used textbooks to the Black school, the church school there, and then immediately they gave their used textbooks, and then immediately start telling the parents, you don't want to go to that school. They're using our old textbooks. We have the brand new textbooks. You know, this thing is so stacked up against the Blacks. The money is just not there. We cater to people who make 60% of what is made by the majority in this nation. And the money, you can't compete with 60%.
Sharon, did you have a follow-up?
I'm going to let Dr. Bird speak, and then I'll come up later.
Okay.
Sharon, you're so kind. Thank you. I wanted to speak to this issue of finances, and thank you, Elder Palmer, for your presentation. I do want to speak, however, because the discussion, we're having today, Elder Woods, regional conferences and where we are with Millennials, Generation X and whatnot. And it kind of goes back. I want to pull back, or bring back, I should say, our passion that we had in our previous segment. Now, with what Elder Palmer has shared, it's true. The dollars just don't add up. They're not commensurate. But where I'm concerned with, when we talk about regional conferences and our young people and our future, where I'm concerned is we need to do some strategic study as to what we're doing with what we have. Now, if you look at the tithe dollar that you talked about, Elder Palmer, you're correct when we do a comparison with paired conferences. But we also need to understand, and I'm for, we need to give study for the duplicity and duplicitous nature of the higher bodies. I'm with all that. But for the sake of this discussion, as we deal with regional conferences, I want to go here tonight. 70% of the tithe dollar that is received at the local church level that goes to the local conference, after reversions from the higher bodies, be it evangelism or educational subsidies, and then our local tithe, 70% of that local tithe dollar stays and flows in that local conference. My question is, what are we doing as stewards of the 70 cents in that dollar? Now, if we want to be serious here and call it like it is, there is a lot of waste that goes on. There is a lot of perpetuation, if I can use that term, of positions and jobs and assignments simply because we've always done it that way.
Come on, Doc.
That has to stop. It has to stop. Now, if COVID-19 has not taught us anything else, half of our regional conferences are posting increases in tithe during this COVID-19 period.
Yes, they are.
Our conference offices have not been in full operation. What does that tell us? Any business will tell you that if you want to increase your revenues in order to grow your business and have net profits, that you have to increase revenues and you have to decrease expenses. I am troubled when we have conferences, regional conferences, that 30% of our payroll is wrapped up in persons and personnel at a local conference office. That's a problem. That's a problem. You got to fund what's going to grow your business. Anybody will tell you, invest in what's going to grow your business. That's evangelism and education. Evangelism and education. But we're putting on programs, conventions, symposiums just to justify why people have certain positions in an office. Come on, folk. Yes, there needs to be some changes at the other levels. But even within our own 70%, we have too much administrative overhead. We have departmental positions. I'm not talking about people. I'm talking about positions. Because I don't want anyone to misinterpret. We're talking about people. I'm not talking about people. I'm dealing with the position. We have positions in our conferences for every department. That was established in 50, 60, 70 years ago because we didn't have the communication channels we have. But we're now remunerating positions that all they're doing is forwarding emails from higher bodies to us to justify why they exist in those positions. Come on, people. Come on. And yet we've got local church schools dying. Cannot compete, compete with our paired conferences. Let's just deal with local elementary and local high schools in the areas. Come on. And so I'm not here saying that those departments are not important. I'm not saying that. What I'm saying is, in the day and age in which we live, in the last and evil day in which we live, what's most important? What's most needed? I look at my church, very large church, but there's a turnover of local employees when at our church, our tithe dollars are equivalent to some of the local conferences in North American Division. But it's hard for us to keep employees because of the turnover in employees because we don't offer benefits. We don't offer benefits to our secretaries. We don't offer benefits to our custodians. We don't offer benefits to our music people. And so it's tough to retain good people or recruit people because we have nothing to offer. So we offer lower wages, we offer no benefits, but just because somebody works at another address that may have less impact than that local church worker, they're entitled to benefits and that local church person is not. So I'll have a church administrative assistant that is critical to the function of the local church, which is critical to the function of the local conference. But just because they work at the local church address and not the local conference address, they do not receive benefits. Folks, that's not right. That's not right. So when you talk about 70% of your tithe and your giving and whatnot, after all the reversions, it stays with your local conference. I would charge our conferences as am I Generation X, Millennial? I know I'm not Millennial, Generation X. I would charge that we've got to be better stewards of our local tithe funds that remain. And it's a tough decision, but we're living in tough times. You got to cut the fat. You got to trim it down. You got to invest what's going to grow. Evangelism and education. Yes, our message is great as an Adventist church, but let me tell you something. It's going to take more than our message to attract people to even want to listen to us. And our buildings, our ministries, our schools, our evangelism, it must be commensurate with the times in which we live. People don't like to talk about it. Salvation is free, but ministry takes money. And we've got to be better stewards as local conferences with the 70% after reversions that God has entrusted us with.
Let me reread the last slide that I put up there. We must learn to dismantle old forms, liberate their energy, and build new structures better suited to our future. You're right. You're exactly right. But there's only so much we can do of beating up our own selves. There's only so much we can do. We need to do that. I said to our conference, when is the last time a church invited a Sabbath school secretary from the conference to come in and help them with their Sabbath school? No. So I'm not picking on the Sabbath school man. I'm picking on a lot of those positions at the conference office. How much are they really needed to build the local church up? Sometimes it's a place to put people who have put years of good service in, and now they've slowed down, and so you give them a slower position. Now this is radical, and I apologize to all of my friends out there who are in those positions. But you're exactly right. But at the same time, you have to look at this. We can't beat ourselves up for so much, because if you look at the state conferences, where we have 20 people in the conference office, they'll have 50. Same size conferences. They have more because they have more money and they can be more wasteful than us. But that doesn't mean we can't be smarter.
Okay, I want to hear. Okay, go ahead, Dr.
Go.
Do a feedback, and then we'll hear from Jason and Sharon.
And
go ahead, Dr.
And thank you, Elder Palmer, because I do feel, I want to be very clear, I do feel that our percentages, it's about 24% you talked about. Those need to be adjusted. Those definitely need to be adjusted. In addition to that, I'm saying we need to do some adjustment locally with our conference. I want to be very, very clear about that. And with that, all of this, what we're talking about, what we talked about in the previous segment, what we talked about in this segment, and I don't want people to think I'm a rebel, but lunacy is defined as doing the same thing, thinking you can get different results.
Over again, that's right.
That's lunacy. And I'm Adventist born, Adventist bred. I'll be Adventist dead. I love my church, but something's got to give. I mean, if not, I'm here to say it. The money is going to run out. Healthcare alone is rising. The money is going to run out. That 24% needs to change. And then roughly the 70% after reversions, that's got to change. The money is going to run out. And my last point, then I'll be quiet, I promise, Woody. It goes back to what I said in the previous segment. And it's hard, but it's true. Evangelism is tight, but it's right. But friends of mine, the only way you change policies, you got to change the people.
That's right.
That's it. That's the only way it's going to happen. Mm-hmm. The only way you talk about, Elder Palmer, and you're right. You talk about we can't beat up our church, and you're right. I love my church, but it's got to change. It has to change. And so change so I don't have to beat you up. Do the right thing so I don't have to beat you up. I mean, it's got to change. That's the only way. And I'm getting to the point, I'm getting older now. I'm tired of arguing. I'm tired of fussing. I'm tired of debating. It is what it is, folks. And the young people, we talk about young people in our conferences, they're not going to stay in a business meeting in the local church and vote anymore with their hands. They're going to vote with their feet. They're going to lead. They're not going to argue. They're not going to fuss. They're not going to do any of that. They're just going to lead, and that's it. That's the reality. You can go along the Eastern Seaboard. You cited some conferences along the Eastern Seaboard, but you can go along the Eastern Seaboard. I would dare to say throughout the Eastern Seaboard that the number of persons in color is commensurate in state conferences as it is in regional conferences. The people have voted with their feet, and they're continuing to vote with their feet. So I'm not trying to beat up my church. I love my church. I love my leaders, but it is what it is. And the young people are not going to fight. They're done.
Okay.
You are castigating. Yeah.
Jason.
If you look at Black Lives Matter and Patrisse Cullors and that whole group of people, and you go to LA, they're in LA, and you go to where they are, to their building, they have their offices on the top. But they've taken over a warehouse. They've repurposed the warehouse. Offices are on the top, and downstairs they have a host of other things, to include classrooms to teach people how to have small businesses. They have counselors there. They have a whole bunch of things happening, and it's all for free. It's all free, right? They have market, fresh food market, the whole nine, for free in the community, right? Now, I will probably get in trouble for this. We are still operating. I grew up in the church, and for as long as I can remember, people are still operating as if the place I sit down to hear Pastor Bird speak is a place that cannot be reutilized for another function. As if when I walk in there, I ought to take my shoes off, right? As if we are operating on a model that has edifices that cannot be repurposed for any other reason than a religious service, when our communities need more than that. They need more than that. They need, the first century church met in houses. And then when they got persecuted, they met in the woods. You know, we are blessed to have a building and we only use it once a week. That's it. Stereotypically, once a week.
Clarify that you and Bird
at my church, one of my churches, when I was in the Netherlands, I was pastoring in the Netherlands, and I had 4 churches. And one of my churches was an interesting building that was on the backside of a grocery store. And the first thing I did when I got there, I said, "What are we using these rooms for?" They were talking about tithe in the small churches, and I said, "Okay, but you have all these empty rooms. What are you doing with these rooms?" Now they have a lady that rents the room to have a daycare. The first elder that I left over there is still working to get an old people's daycare in the building. Now they're not Adventist people, but they're using the building. Now I see you, Pastor Bushner. I know Pastor Bushner and Pat Miss Chapel is a unique entity. You guys are unique. Yes, you are. You have done something, but that Pastor Bird is right in the terms of tithing. Yeah, absolutely. We got to do something with the money that we get coming in with the tithe. But how are we generating it? Like, how are we generating funds? Like, legitimately, I went to Oakwood as an older student, and I could not understand why we didn't have our own bookstore. I couldn't understand why Oakwood did not have its own music production company. Some of the best gospel I've ever heard was made every year by the students, but I can't find it anywhere. Why aren't we producing these people? Everybody in the music industry knows that Oakwoodites can sing. They know it. I mean, there's a video, and Manders and Kurt Franklin was there at Buddy Bird's church and laid on the floor. Had an aha moment with Jesus on the floor listening to the Aeolians. C.C. Winans is quoted as saying, does everybody at Oakwood sing? We don't capitalize on our resources. We have a boundless entity of resources and imaginative individuals in ministry and in our pews. And every day, every week, we tell them, this is your Christian purpose and our church's function. Come here, cathart, and then go and do what else you need to do. And our building is only for catharsis? No. You want to talk about tearing it down, Elder Palmer? I remember you from Germantown. And you want to talk about tearing it down? Fine, repurpose some buildings. Repurpose some buildings. Get our people to understand that they are the holy place, not the building. Because if there's one thing COVID-19 has taught us, is that the building is insignificant to your worship. Which means if we go back to the building, I hope we don't go back to do things the way we did, or we will have wasted our time in quarantine.
Preach.
Maybe the building needed a Sabbath. I quit. I'm done.
Did he just say the building needed a Sabbath? Did he just say the building needed a Sabbath?
He did. The brick needed a rest.
Okay, who's next? Now look, folks. We have Ivan Williams,
has been
Ministerial Director for North American Division. I promised to get you back, but by unanimous consent, we have already gotten Dr. Quasey, now Elder Palmer, to be co-chairs of the Reestablishing the Layman Leadership Council. All in favor, say aye. Let it be so. Let it be so. Okay, Sharon, we want you to come back. And I know we want to finish up the comments. Dr. Williams, thank you for your patience. The conversation got good. It got out of hand. I mean, our numbers are growing up. I thought they would be going down. They're going up. And we're going to put on for 2 hours. So please, Dr. Williams, forgive me. You're my brother. And we love you. But We're about to bring you on, but Sharon, wrap it up. And I know Claudia.
No, I gotta say something too.
Okay, well, we'll let you guys say it, but we gotta keep moving because, folks, we're going to have to just do it again. I'm sorry, we're going to have to do it again because y'all dropping too much fire and it's hot.
Okay, I'm gonna be quick. So,
Okay.
Dr. Palmer, I don't mean any disrespect, but the amount of tithe that we collect compared to the whites is the excuse. We have got to shift that mindset. I believe stewardship is doing the best with what you have and asking God to do the rest versus making bad decisions and then asking God to fix it. And one of the things that we do in our Black conferences that don't happen in the white conferences, regional, and we're talking about wasting money, is we move pastors at a whim, which costs thousands of dollars to move pastors across the country. If you go into those state conferences, pastors stay at churches all 10, 12, 15, 20 years, and they don't move as long as the members are happy. But in our work, we just move them every time we shift, that we just, there's a lot of money. There's a lot of things that we are looking at within our conferences that's waste that we are not willing to deal with. And yes, we're going to say we need to make structural change, but we're not really willing to make structural change. We want to tinker around the edges and not really deal with the structure. And we have to start really breaking this stuff down from the inside out to make some of the changes. And like Buddy said, the people got to go. It's time for us to get a different set of minds in there and learn lessons from other places than just the broken system within the church. Sorry, Daniel, you're next.
Let me say this here. I totally agree with what you said. I totally agree with what Elder Bird said. My only issue in this discussion is this: don't compare us. Don't say we're wasteful and they're not. Don't say that our lack of stuff is just because we're wasteful. They are just as wasteful. The money is just not there, and I believe that some of this is going to come back to bite some people, because I see some people in this room that may become conference presidents someday, and they're going to have to defend themselves for statements that they're making today or statements they're made around the kitchen table. So let's be careful. But you're right. You're right. We're excessive. We can be smarter. We can be smarter than them. I think the regional conferences are better managed than the state conferences. You can be excessive when you have a lot of money. You can make mistakes and you can cover those mistakes. The regional conferences, they make mistakes and they blow up. We all see them. But I'm agreeing with all of what you're saying but don't make it look like we're doing something that the others are not doing.
I think that's a good point. I mean, I'm the only employed pastor, so I guess the statement, be careful of your statements. I mean, I don't know. I think that's a problem we're dealing with. We're not willing to speak truth to power. I mean, the reality is this, and I want to say this. We can dismiss the young people all we want.
Come on.
We can dismiss them all we want. But I'm telling you, in 10 years, I'll still be here. We got to have a church. In 10 years, I'll be here. We got to have a church. And, hey, if it is that, they knock Buddy Bird down or whatever, so be it. But we got to speak truth to power. You got to do it. And
you said it exactly right. When these young people walk out of the church, they're not turning around to argue with us. They're just leaving. Oh. They're not arguing. They're not telling you why they're leaving. They're not making a big fuss out of it. They're just saying, this is not for me. See you later.
I want to say that I think that some of the numbers that Elder Palmer put up, that we deal with 60% of what state conferences deal with, I think it goes back to institutional racism. And I think when we recognize that our churches are predominantly made of African American women, it's not only a race issue, it's also a gender issue, because as women, African American, Hispanic, and Native American women, we make about 62 cents to every dollar that white non-Hispanic males make. And so I want to say, as we continue our struggle for justice, Black women speak up for everybody. I think it's time for other people to start speaking for Black women as well. So I want to say that, number one, that it's not just racial, it's also a gender issue. Number two, I think we need more women in leadership. I think we look at things have different perspectives. And I think that if we had more women in leadership, and I'm not just saying replace all men with women, I'm saying a partnership, I think we get a different perspective, we get a different dynamic. And then the third thing, as we talk about restructuring, I looked at some of the numbers, and I looked at camp meeting numbers, and I looked at large evangelism numbers. And I think, not only on a conference level, but also on a church level, where we spend our dollars really has to change. And even, no knock against you, Dr. Bird, but even how we do public evangelism, that does not work as effectively with younger generations. And so we have to start rethinking even the evangelism that we do.
So just real quick, and then I know you guys got to go to, Dr. Williams. That's my other partner in crime. So going to give him his moment. But firstly, I really want to thank Dr. Bird for what he said. I really don't think you guys kind of understand, or maybe you do, the gravity of what he said. And I think that we truly have the opportunity to really knock down the regional conferences and really rebuild something and restructure something that can really be most effective for our communities, not just our insular Adventist Black people, but our communities at large, if we really heed and hear what he just said. And behind a voice like his, I just really wanted to express gratitude for that. With that said, anybody can try to come for him, and I'm pretty confident the millennials got Bird. So anybody, and it's not even just Bird. I think millennials, and I don't want to speak generally. I know I'm the only millennial here, but I don't want to paint a broad brush. But I do think that one characteristic that is central to us is that of authenticity, that of accountability, and individuals that are willing to do the work. And anybody that is willing to do any of those three things, I don't want to say you have our vote, but I mean, you have our support. So yeah, ain't nobody, that's fine. The other thing that I want to deal with that Elder Palmer mentioned that I think is critical to this conversation is when we think about the wealth gap within African American communities as well, and he kind of briefly mentioned this, we are only making 60 cents on the dollar, right? So already our Black Adventist members are submitting tithe and offering at a lower rate. Okay, so if that is the case, then the conversation around our finances should not exclusively be around how can we get more Black people to give more tithe and offering. The conversation, as Dr. Bird and so many have already mentioned, needs to be around what do we do with the tithe that we have. And I think that one thing that I just want to mention that was not mentioned already is that one of the maybe positions or offices that probably should be instituted that is not instituted is that of digital online ministry. Individuals that actively know how to use StreamYard, that actively know how to use Zoom, graphic artists. There are individuals that actually know how to help you go into the future. And I think what is unfortunately happening with our young adults as well is we're saying, hey, you're a millennial, you know what social media is. Can you do all of the church's social media for free? Hey, can you do all of social media on the side? Can you design all this stuff on Canva? Can you go and download Adobe and quickly cut up some videos and share? And we have turned what is out in the world, digital strategists, online content manager roles and positions, into side jobs that we give people small stipends for, or don't pay them anything at all. And so I just really want to hit home that there are real needs in the church that we should be paying for, but we can't afford to pay full salaries and benefits for, because we are actively still paying for Ted to be able to travel to whatever country he wants to travel to meet. So I think that when we really think about what we're doing with our money as a whole, I think that we need to really be restructuring, rethinking, hey, we actually don't have a public relations officer. We don't have a social justice program coordinator. We don't have, you see what I'm saying? Like, there are real roles that individuals can be doing that actually represent the belief systems, the agenda and the desires of the people in the church. And then the last thing I will say is this: there are millennials that have already left. Millennials are not 18. Millennials are grown. We talk about millennials like we're in high school. I was in high school 10 years ago. I have whole jobs and pay rent. Okay. Millennials have children, have been married for 10 years. When you're talking about millennials, you are talking about individuals who are fully grown, fully working, and have full grown families. And so these are not high schoolers. These are not college students. These are individuals who are saying, I actually don't like how you are doing business in the church. I have left. I actually don't like your children's program, so I send them to the white church. I actually don't like how you refuse to not ordain women, so I have left. And so we're dealing with the fact that there are a host of millennials that have stayed, like myself. Like Pastor Bird, I grew up listening to him say that. I'm Adventist born, I'm Adventist bred, I'm gonna be Adventist dead, yo. But the fact of the matter is that there are some millennials that are not on that tip, who have actually already gone. And so when we're having this conversation about where our regional conferences go and the work of millennials, we actively have to work with the millennials that are still here and go get the ones that left in our work to restructure what it is that we're doing. So I think that there's just a lot. It's a very layered, it's a very complicated, but it's a very important work that I really feel like is necessary in order for our church to remain relevant and really continue to do the evangelistic work that we really do believe and see in Scripture.
I hope everyone understands that I'm not threatening Pastor Bird's future. All I'm saying is his future is very bright. One day he'll be sitting in that chair making those decisions. And all I'm saying is remember these things now when you have the opportunity. And others of you will be on executive committees in different conferences. Speak your voice, the same voice that you have now. Speak that when you are sitting at the table.
Well, this has been, buddy, you're on mute. Something's not right. We can't hear you.
Okay. Thank you, Elder Palmer. I love Elder Palmer. He's known my whole life. He and my mother graduated from high school together. We're good. I just find it interesting, though, when I'm out here protesting, I'm being told, you better watch your future. And then when I'm talking about our church and what we need to do, I'm told, you need to watch your future. Please, I've had to check myself. We got to listen to these young people. We got to listen. If not, they're going to walk. Yeah. They're going to walk.
And like Claudia already said, children's Sabbath school means something. We grossly underestimate it, but children's Sabbath school means something. It's because it's the millennials that are bringing their kids to Cradle Roll Kindergarten. It's not us. Mm-hmm. It's not my kids coming to Cradle Roll Kindergarten. So, Claudia has a dead point, but Generation Z, y'all think millennials or something. Generation Z, woo, y'all need to see them. And I have two of them in complete action. And sometimes they make you feel like you got to ask for permission. So, it's a whole, buddy, it. There's stuff our kids say to us that we never said to our parents. Never said to our parents. But guess what? They're not being disrespectful, but they're just like, we ain't taking it. And we don't have to take it. If you're training us to be confident and speak truth to power and that we deserve the best, we do not have to accept it. One thing I want to say is income inequality is a worldwide problem.
Mm-hmm.
It's a worldwide problem. We don't want to talk about it in the church because we see it as political, but it is a worldwide problem that has been entrenched in systems and institutionalized for a long time. This is not just something that just came upon the scene. This has been entrenched in systems, and you can look at the data and see how this has disrupted not just the United States of America, but indigenous countries all across the world. And the church has been silent about these systems that have kept poor people poor all across the world. And I submit to you today that if the church speak up to the needs that are impacting the community, which is evangelism, hallelujah, somebody, the public affairs aspect of the religious liberty ministry that tends to get ignored because we always want to dump people in the pool instead of following what's in ministry of healing and more importantly in the Bible and the Gospels about mingling with the people. Now we can quote it like nobody's business, but we won't address income inequality. We won't address systemic oppression. And then when people speak up, have these forums, have these shows, and want to clean up the world, but also want to clean up the church where they reside, all of a sudden we start labeling folk. We start talking to folk.
I think it's important that we understand that separation of church and state does not mean that we can't speak about politics and things. It means from the Constitution that the government cannot impose a church on us and it can't force us not to worship. But there's nothing that says we can't talk about politics in church. And I think we should be talking about those concerns that impact us in church. So I just want to make that clear for a lot of people. They talk about separation of church and state, two different things.
They misquote Ellen White. You know, they want to talk about Ellen White, about what she says about slavery. You talked about it, Jason, earlier. I mean, where's Ellen White, Joseph Bates, James White, Uriah Smith? If you heard what they said during slavery, you were like, huh? I mean, sometimes I feel that our dead leaders' voices are stronger than the ones that are alive today. And
all I got to say is this. You all know that John Lewis meant a lot to me, my ministry as a mentor when I was in Atlanta pastoring, even Huntsville. And all I know is he was called the conscience of Congress. And he was known as Representative Good Trouble. So if I'm in that camp, Good Trouble, hey, I'm good.
Yeah.
I'm good. Good trouble. I'm good. And I'd rather our leaders and our church, hear this from us now than for us to be saying 10, 15 years from now, we didn't hear it, we didn't listen. So I'd rather good trouble exists now than to just in 10, 15 years, they're gone, it's done. What my great-grandparents worked for is gone. But most importantly, as you said, Brother Woods, the gospel of Jesus Christ is not promulgated. And we can't lose sight of that. We talk about the money and all these different things. Why? Because it's ministry we want to engage in, because we want to prepare men, women, boys, and girls for the second coming of Jesus Christ. He loves us and he wants us to live forever with him.
And going back to what you said, Dr. Bird, what Dario said earlier, but I mean, we have to look at what's happening in our communities. I mean, Claudia, we all talk about what's happening in our communities and make that the issue for the church to deal with today. Today, if it's whatever it is. I mean, if it's a police officer and reform, I'm all for strengthening police community relations. But what are we doing to get people on the police boards? What are we doing about hosting neighborhood block club meetings? Like Jason O'Rourke just said, we got to repurpose the church. Why aren't the block club meetings at our church?
Well, at our church,
or if we're going back to our finance conversation,
go ahead.
And if we're having a finance conversation, what are we doing to pay off student loan debt, credit card debt? What are we doing to get people out? Teach financial literacy. If you get people's budgets and their personal finances together, then obviously your church budget is going to be in a much better situation as well. Go ahead, Sharon.
No, I was going to say, I think at our church, we have decided versus just marching in the streets, we're going to become very active with voter registration this year. And I think one of the keys to all of this conversation is education of our members in a lot of different areas. We get in the pulpit a lot of times and we say we should not rob God, and we always come with the same scripture on tithing, but we're not teaching true stewardship. And true stewardship is helping people develop a well-balanced, well life in all categories of their life. And we need to teach our folks, and I agree with you 100%, that as much as we could step forward and start teaching people how to get out of debt, how to improve their lives in broader perspective, it could really help us move forward. But we have to get involved in all areas, whether it is the political movement at the church level, the political movement outside of the church, and how we help our people become whole and well people.
Okay, Jason, do you have something?
Let's go on to the good minister.
Thank you so much. We appreciate that. We look forward to working with you and Dr. Kwesi as we reestablish the Layman's Leadership Council and educate folk all across this country. Thank you so much, and God bless you. Our next special guest is Dr. Ivan Williams, the NAD Ministerial Director. We so appreciate him coming, and most importantly, his patience. Dr. Williams has preached twice today, and I know he's tired, but he still has something in the tank because he's one of God's anointed people for such a time as this. So, Dr. Williams, if we can bring your slides up and let you go into the presentation. But thank you for staying with us during this time.
Woody, thank you. It's been more than excellent being with you. Relevant discussions. The panel is on point. I got one thing. I see I need to be a panelist next time to talk, not a presenter. Hey, maybe we need to sing "Now the Day is Over" because all the millennials are gone. Sabbath is over. But
they're not gone.
They're still with us.
They're still with us. Keep going.
I'm going to be quick and to the point. If I were a panelist, I would have asked Dr. Palmer, why do we have to send the money up in order for the money to come down? That's a whole nother discussion. Let me just share something with you all. First of all, millennials are those born 1981 to 1996. Gen X, born 1965 to 1980. So they are grown. The thing that I want us to realize is we are in America existing, ministering, living in a post-Christian world. It is a post-Christian world because the Bible is not the norm, nor is it believed by 40% of the 365 or 70 million people in America. The thing that I want to engage our Gen X and millennials with, we don't have time, but let me just put it on the table. We do not have a leadership succession plan, not only of formal mentoring, but because of the way we do nominating committee, we cannot really, even as constituencies, choose leaders to be grown and mentored and prepared. And that's how the devil gets in. In fact, pastoring, I saw it every year. The devil got busy doing nominating committee time because it becomes a political process. Let me tell you all something. I am the ministerial director of the North American division, but this role doesn't define me. I was faithful pastoring in a little church in South Carolina with no heat and air. And by God's grace, I've been faithful doing this job. I didn't ask for this job. I don't owe it to anybody to do anything to keep this job. And so what I want to say is that leaders should come and go with the support of constituencies who know what their leadership strengths are. And so if I'm asked to do something else, I shouldn't lose my religion just because of that. We need to prepare the next generation. I was a little boy growing up in Atlanta, Berean. Grew up there, went to grades 1 through 10. And then I had to go to Georgia Cumberland Academy because Berean Academy, now GAAA, didn't have 11 and 12th grade. The thing that I want you all to know is the first time I went to school with Caucasians was at Georgia Cumberland in the 11th grade in high school. I was prepared for leadership in regional schools going to a regional church. There is legitimate possibilities for leaders to flourish in the regional conference system. One of the things I also want to say here is that ministry service components are the things that attract millennials and Gen X's. Gone are the days for paying penance in church and leaving as if that is the life of the church. Young people want to be involved. I never forget having a millennial on my church board, and I was really embarrassed that she was there because of the way that the builders, the boomers, and the busters acted. And so we have to prepare and not only elect young people to serve, but use them in ways that will show them as the lifeblood and the fabric of the church. Another thing that millennials are demanding and asking is more transparency. Tell us what is and why it is. Let's talk about it. Let's stop hiding and using technology and social media in a way that can speak to the issues of today. The last thing I have here is community sobriety. They say stay woke, but sobriety of consciousness, sobriety of community, sobriety physically and spiritually, and maintaining a relevant ministry. What's important for us today in impacting and using and coming alongside with Generation X and millennials is we have to just say we don't know it all. Have a teachable spirit. And not be afraid of answering questions. You can ask me anything. I may not know the answer, and I'm going to tell you that. But let's stop hiding. Let's stop being available to people to ask us questions that we are afraid of. And maybe we can answer the questions together and roll up our sleeves and find a solution. Woody, go on to the next slide. I don't know if it's even relevant now, but you talked to me about what we're doing with pastors. One of the things I want to say about this is we don't train pastors to have community consciousness. I never had one class that taught me when I moved into a town how to go and meet the mayor, talk to the police chief, go and meet the city fathers or mothers. And we are striving to turn the Titanic to say, you're not just the Chamber of Commerce. You're not just pastoring that church. You're also pastoring that community. And so we want to hold pastors accountable. We have defined the pastor space. Next slide. And we have come up with, through research, through feedback, 7 key areas or core qualities: character, evangelism, leadership, worship management, scholarship, and relationship. If pastors are excelling in these areas, they are pastors moving forward and constantly growing. We've developed a feedback loop, which is an assessment tool that helps to define leadership excellence through church board, because a church has to be healthy as well. If a pastor is healthy and a church is not healthy, if a pastor is whole and a church is not whole, or vice versa, you still don't have a match of leadership excellence. And so this is an assessment tool we've given to conferences. Let's go to the next slide, please. I believe that may be it. One of the things I want to say, go to the Adventist Learning Community. This is a place where if you ask a person to serve in the church, in fact, Dr. Bird did this. He helped us put on video defining responsibilities for roles. I'll never forget what Elder E.E. Cleveland told me. He said, Ivan, it's an injustice to include people without informing them. We nominate people to do things. We have no training. We just throw them out there, sink or swim. That's an injustice. We've got to do a better job of training and equipping. And if you don't have anyone and you can't train someone, don't have the ministry. We've got to be able to say this. I'll say this last but not least. The last thing that was on the year-end meeting floor at the North American Division was looking at restructuring. And a millennial put that on the floor and it was voted. So hopefully we can talk about that this fall at the North American Division year-end meetings. When I was a little boy, I used to look at those offices and say, what do those people do? And God has a sense of humor. I'm now sitting in one of those offices. And I just want you all to know today that leadership is not defined by a action in time. It's defined by action in time that impacts the future. And I believe that is vision. I'll say this, time is out for leaders to continue to be threatened by others' giftedness around them. I want the best people around me. It may make me look good, but we cannot continue to have groupthink in leadership at the round tables of our churches, conferences, unions, and the division and general conference. We need not a monolith of thought. We need varied viewpoints that will stretch all of us to grow and grow in grace. Woody, I'm done. It's late. And maybe your panel has 0 questions. I don't know.
That will never happen. Did you see who's on our panel? 0 questions. That will never, ever happen with you, Dr. Williams. We just want to bring everybody back. Dr. Williams, you really spoke about accountability and training and trends. And the reason why we really wanted you on the show, and I'm sorry we extended, but the conversation, as somebody said in the notes, it got gooder and gooder, is after we talked about the history, after we talked about the finances, you still have the pastors who are the leaders at the local church. And they have to be engaged. They have to be aware. And that's one of the reasons why we have 2-3 pastors on right now who can speak to it, as well as yourself, who's a former pastor. But the needs of pastors today are not the same as they were 20 years ago. The expectations of a pastor today are not the same that they are 20 years ago. People honestly expect their pastor to be industrious. Mm-hmm. I'm not going to even use the word lazy, and I'm not going to even say meeting the minimum standard. They expect them to be industrious. They expect them to be in the trenches. They expect them to have communication. I mean, all during COVID-19, if you're not traveling, because you haven't, and you're not traveling, you should be in having relationship and contact with your members. So there's a different level of expectation that I think is realistic, that is not universal across the board from one conference to another. So why is that? And thank you for telling us that there's a 7 steps, because I want to look more into that, because that's something that should be universally applied.
Yeah, let me say this too, Woody. One of the things that's important to me is leaders should be multipliers of others, not of themselves. And when I don't duplicate, why shouldn't everybody that at least desires to serve in ministry know what I do, and that is prepared to do what I do? If I keep it to myself, I'm only hindering the mission of the future. And I heard a senior person tell me, I won't call any names, the only people who are talking about succession leadership are those who want the jobs of those who need to be succeeded. Really? Really? I believe our lack of mentoring, succession leadership planning hinders mission, period.
Okay, Pastor Hoy?
Yeah, I think it goes back to restructure, and we keep saying restructure. Pretty much for our church, it's one size fits all. I can't tell you how many conversations I've had about souls and goals. It breaks my heart that I have young people that I've mentored who are not pastoring anymore because our church couldn't redefine itself to allow them to minister in their giftedness. And so, you know, I think what I want to say for our generations we've got to demand something different from our leadership, or we'll still get the same thing that we have. And that means not just looking for the person who preaches the best. There's so many more facets of ministry than preaching. And we've got to have leaders who have multiple skills other than preaching. Don't get me wrong, preaching is big. And if a pastor can't preach, then, there's another job. But there are other things that pastors have to do. Dr. Williams, you mentioned being able to meet community leaders. You mentioned being able to counsel. There's just so much more we have to do. And I think, again, I go back to saying, be the change that you want to be. If you want your church to look differently, then you do have to speak up. But not only speak up, but you have to step up to the plate and say, I want to do something differently. I applaud those people who believe so much in their calling that they were willing to step outside of the church to follow their calling. I applaud the leaders who said the church doesn't have something for me, so I'm going to create my own. But I do hope that the church will expand its vision and its structure so that we don't have to lose people and we can keep them and grow even more.
Dr. Jason.
I would agree. I agree with Pastor Hoy, and I would even go one step further. I find I was always interested in the notion that ministry is pastoring. I always thought that was a very narrow definition of ministry. And so you went to seminary if you were going to be a pastor. Like, we should not desire to have theologically trained individuals in the business world. I always thought that was very interesting. And I always found it very interesting when I talked to my pastor friends of how they got their MDiv. And then once they, the way that it sounded is that once they got into their districts or their conference, development kind of just withered away, like Jonah's plant. It just kind of, there's a worm that came in and ate it up. And then you're just kind of there and you just do your time and then you keep on going. And the gentleman from Virgin Airlines was asked a question. The CEO, he looks like Fabio, but he's not. He was asked a question, and they said, what happens if you train all these people with all these other skills and they leave? And he said, well, what happens if we don't and they stay?
Wow. Man.
And I find Elder Williams, you made a statement about meeting the different peoples in the city. I would offer that we need to engage and or encourage and empower our pastors to continue their education and develop further skill sets that can actually benefit the local church. Like, Dr. Bird he's got a business mind. He's got some other education. It's benefiting his ministry. And if there's a minister that says, you know what, guys, thank you for my 5 years and I've got this education, I'm going to go over here. Good. Go over there and take your ministry and do what we trained you to do over there. But there's this fear that we are pouring into people and we're not going to reap our money back when it's going to be multiplied. They're going to have a training. They're going to go out there and get a better job. They're going to have more influence, and they're going to do theology in the business sector. I'm done after this. I was in Florida, and I joined a church. There's a thing out there that these people are doing, and they're kind of Reformed theologians, but they're doing it, and they have this workplace theology group, and they give you a whole set of books. They have meetings, how to do theology in the marketplace. Right? Listen, Pastor Bird, it's their evangelism. That's their evangelism. They train business people how to be theological in the marketplace.
Yeah.
I quit.
I what I want to add is, something a bit more practical. And I just share this as an example to those that might be listening. What is something that you could do? I grew up in a very small rural church called Niles, Philadelphia in Niles, Michigan. And from the time I was a child, my grandfather was an elder. My grandmother was a clerk. My father was the treasurer. My mother was an elder and a leader. My aunt was the music minister. And so I found myself, not even by workings of their own doing, but when I was 7, I was a junior clerk. By the time I was 15, I was on the nominating committee, but I didn't have a vote. When I was 16, I was head usher. When I graduated college, Sister Anderson came and told me, she said, make sure you're in a church and you're serving just like we trained you. All right. And if I, and I served with them and, served on the music committee, served in so many spaces, and they very intentionally, these are boomers, very intentionally put a child around crucial tables, not knowing what my spiritual gifting necessarily was, what my interests were, but they were like, we are going to make sure that she understands how the church functions, what it does, and what are the various departments within the church. And that when you get older, you can then kind of figure out where you fit in and get in. As a grown adult, most recently, I just got cornered by 3 boomer Black women at Brinklow Church, Denise Crary, Denise Medley, and Shelly Nurse. And they cornered me and they said, Claudia, we want you to be the head clerk. All right. And that was extremely overwhelming for me, And so they were like, man, but it's okay. We'll train you. We're not going to leave you out to dry. But the question is, are you willing to sit on the board? Are you willing to hold a board position as a young millennial? If so, we are willing to be the support system to help you learn how to do this role effectively and grow within it. And so I say that to say, for anybody that's listening at the local church level, you're trying to figure out what to do. It's very easy. You can grab your Gen Z, you can grab your millennials, you can grab anybody at any age from 7, from 7 to grown 29 right now. I have had some kind of integral role in the church, not always a voted position. When they had to talk about real business, I had to sit outside for a couple minutes. When my mom went to executive committee, I had to play my Game Boy out the door. You got to do the things that are appropriate for children. But I think that unfortunately, not many millennials that I know have my story. I know many millennials who have wanted to have that kind of experience with their church and have wanted to have boomers and Gen Xers and the silent generation to come along and say, hey, Claudia, here's your copy of the clerk's manual. Let's sit and talk with each other about how to do this. Claudia, here's your copy of the usher's manual. Let's sit and talk about how to do this. And there's too many of my friends that I know that have too many horror stories and traumatic experiences that do not allow them to serve. And so I think that, Dr. Williams, I really appreciate even your feedback on this once we get to the higher echelons, because I'm gonna be honest, I don't even know, and this is somebody who's deeply in it, I don't even know how to become a delegate for a GC session or a triennial session, right? Like, I don't know how to get engaged at certain higher levels, and I might want to. And I know that there are other millennials like me or other young people like me that are saying, hey, I want to get involved in my local church and I really want somebody to mentor me. But Elder so-and-so wants to hold on to AY until he's 96. And so I don't know what to do with that. And so I just wanted to really throw that into the conversation because I really appreciated you mentioning that. I think that there is a real divide. There is a real generational schism and divide in our church that we don't talk about. They don't think we're here. They don't think we care. They don't respect how we do things. They don't want, it seems like they don't want us there. And so I just really feel like that's so crucial to this conversation as well. Moving our local church, moving our conferences, moving our institutional church at large is really going to require some successive leadership and some mentorship.
Can I say this, Claudia? I thank you. When I don't trust those who follow behind me, the indictment is not on the people who follow me. The indictment is on me because I have not done due diligence to not only give that person an opportunity, but to make sure that they're ready and trained to do it. And I applaud, Claudia, your journey. That was my journey as well. Class pastor in many classes and yada, yada, yada. But the indictment is on the current leadership. They're to be the ones looked at for the future leadership. It's their responsibility as well. Can't hear you, Woody.
You're muted.
You're actually making sense and not stating the party line. I can almost recite the speech about what to say when we get caught up like this. I just know what to say. It's just so instinctive that I can have it flowing out of my mouth and just expect the answer. And then now you're being candid, you're being open, you're being transparent. It's like, oh man, what's happening here? What's taking us so long to get to this point? But Dr. Bird, I know you have something to say, and we're going to wrap this up. We want to thank our listening audience for sticking with us. There are some follow-up steps, and I'm going to show you some announcements. We promised a 3-part series with this regional conference discussion, and we have one next month. But we want you to mark your calendars for September 25 and 26 for the Conscience and Justice Council virtual convention, and we'll share more information with you in the next couple of weeks. The Conscience and Justice Council virtual convention is where all of this will culminate together. Many of you participated last week in our rallying for disciples, Black Lives Matter too. So all of these discussions are leading us to September 25 and 26 for the Conscience and Justice Council virtual convention. So please stay tuned. We're gathering all this information together because we need action steps. Part of that today is the reestablishment of the Layman's Leadership Council with Dr. Kwesi and Elder Palmer, but there's more steps that need to follow. Dr. Bird, and then we're going to wrap this. Dr. Williams, since you waited for us, we're going to let you close the Sabbath because you are the patient of the saints. They that only keep the commandments of God and have the true testimony of Jesus Christ, because y'all kept us on here for 2.5 hours, and we know that you preached twice. So,
you owe me. That's all I say.
Sharon had a comment too. She was holding her hand up.
Let y'all all talk to close it out.
I'll yield to Sharon. Woody, I just want to say, Elder Woods.
The bird's on mute.
Oh, I'm on
mute. You're not on mute.
Okay. I just want to say, I don't have to say anything. I've said enough today. But I do want to say this was good. The conversation was rich. I enjoyed it. I thank everyone on the panel. This has been good. So I'm looking forward to part 2, whether we're your panel or not.
Y'all, don't worry. Y'all coming back. Don't worry. Y'all coming back. But mark it on your calendars because we got to follow up at the Conscience and Justice Council convention. I mean, we're only as strong as our weaker link and us coming together, having these conversations and engaging people. We just can't be one and done. We've got to take it to the next level where action is not just reliving this conversation we had today, but taking steps in terms of what was shared today from each and every one of you, because you have given food for thought that has not just blessed millennials and Generation X, but we have baby boomers and silent generation saying, y'all doing it, you're talking about it, and you're speaking truth to power. So Dr. Bird, thank you for the investment of time. But if there's anything you want to say, you want to do that, we'll talk offline later.
No. Okay. I'm done. Go to Sharon.
Go to Sharon.
Huh?
Any comments, any closing remarks?
I think in closing, what I would say is, so my professional background is performance improvement and business transformation. And one of the things that I think the church can learn from business is that whenever we go into our organization, whether it be a hospital, whatever it is that we need to turn around, there's some basic steps that we always start with. And when you start off, you have to have somewhere where we determine what our true north is. And we have to have some conversation within the church as to what we know that the Bible says, go ye therefore and teach. We have the Adventist mission, but what is the true north that we need to fix? The challenges that we have in the church and what that looks like going forward. And then once we determine that, we've got to look at people, talent management, recruitment, succession planning, the process of what are we wasting, how do we remove waste, and how do we continuously improve, and then how do we manage all of that through governance. If we're not willing to build a structure that looks at all of those pieces, we will always have this conversation going forward, because any organization that does not have a continuous improvement plan underneath it of how you're always moving forward. Adventism used to be a movement. We're no longer moving. We're pretty much standing still and trying to move the pegs around, and not really. And we have to get back to that place of movement. And I think we have a fiduciary relationship with God that demands that we do things differently and look at it differently. And I know that in the business world, we see it as secular, but there's a lot we can learn from it. And if we can take some of these lessons from the business world and apply them to the church, I think that movement can start again, because now we've created a foundation for true evangelism to happen.
Well, Sharon, we're so excited that you're a part of the Layman's Leadership Council. So we just thank you in advance for your contributions already. God bless you. And you keep those thoughts down. Don't throw away your notes. We got you on there. Claudia, come on.
Man, no, this has been a fantastic conversation. I'm just honored to be here on such a distinguished panel, and to grow and to learn and to share. I think the final thing that I would say is, if we could have our leadership intentionally reach down to millennials, but particularly our Gen Z. Those are the ones that are really out the door, and really, struggling. I think if we could reach down and pull them and really start getting them involved like yesterday, I think that we could really start seeing some structural changes, because you would have the ideas of different people flowing, in the room. And so rather than asking us to execute, I guess the request that I have of my church is that you ask myself, millennials, and Gen Z to actually be a part of the planning, to not just execute the plan that you have designed, but to actually allow us to be a part of the table that does the brainstorming.
And Claudia, we want y'all at the table, but not only do we want you all, we're counting on you, Claudia, to mentor our kids. I mean, I want my kids to look up to you. They hear you speak up. We want that. I mean, that's what you had at your Niles, Philadelphia. Ivan was at Highland. And he was that for me when he was at the seminary at Highland. And so, I mean, those things are rich. And the good thing, I got to speak about Doc, I got to give him his props. He's the same guy. He is no different. And when he was pastoring in California, when I saw him out there in San Diego and the NAD ministerial, he's the same guy. And I'm telling you, living in Berry Springs, I've met a ton of preachers, ton of them. And somehow, some way, they drink the water, and it's no longer Kool-Aid. Somehow it became Welch's non-alcoholic wine for the sake of sobriety. And it's like two different people. But I appreciate Dr. Wins because he's the same person.
Absolutely. I mean, I appreciate you, Woody. You've always tried to make sure that, you put me on as well. But I also want to shout you out because I saw my niece, Priscilla Josiah, was on, and she was talking about, Black Lives Matter and stuff. That's another young woman who's in high school, Kristen Josiah's daughter. And so she was waxing eloquent, and so I think that's great. I think the more space that we can make for our young people. Greta Thunberg done just won $1 million and several awards, and that child is 15 is the most well-known environmental activist in the world. I think that if we continue to sleep on our young people, our youth, our 13 and 14 and 15-year-olds have things to offer. And if we would just give them the space and the platform and the mentorship and support, man, we could make this church everything that we really dream it to be.
All right. Thank you. Pastor Dario, my buddy, my friend, anything you want to say to close out?
I think in terms of next steps, I would love to see our regional conferences have a professionally facilitated convening of intergenerational, different generations coming together to chart a new course, praying, asking God for the vision, and then working those steps out. I would love to see us dialogue with our younger generations, not only dialogue with them, but inventory their gifts and allow them to utilize their gifts. I would love to see us repurpose camp meeting from what we have now to a summer of service and evangelism, where we're putting the dollars to young people to do something differently. I'd love to see every single regional church conduct voter registration. Participant media has the Good Trouble curriculum. It's something easy that everyone can do. And we just need to, I think, refocus and bring people together. And like everyone, Woody, I am very grateful to you to have this dialogue. I'm grateful for all of the panelists. I'm grateful for the people who are listening and adding their comments. I'm grateful for the people that we talk to on a daily basis. And the goal is not to criticize. I think we have so much hope and we want to see so much better, and we want to participate. And so I think bringing people to the table to change, and I hope our regional conference leadership is listening to this and will move forward with us.
All right, Dr. Jason, we'll let you close this out.
Okay. Well, one, I thank you, Pastor Woods and panelists. I think a significant thing for me, next steps, I'd like to see a unified vision from the regional conferences. I know, whose conference, his reign, I get it, but I'd like to see a unified vision. I'd like to see some concepts on how the church can generate funds, since Elder Palmer has demonstrated that we are making 60% of a dollar and we have less income. Okay, so let's generate some income. Who do we need to know so that we can get our churches and therefore the community the funds it needs to do what it needs to do for the community and for the gospel? And I'd like to see. This is me. I'd like to see. They did that. You all, Pastor Bird, you all opened that marketplace down there. Good job. Yes, and that's a start. And I think we need more of that type of stuff. Stuff that actually says, "Hey, community, we have things you need," And so I just want to leave it there. I just like to see us get a little bit more hands-on with the people that need us, and generate something that will turn, because the money's not coming from the outside. We got to generate stuff from the inside. We have to. And so those are just things that I would hope to see.
Well, before I thank the panelists, I want to ask Pastor Paul. I want to thank him again. Can we give him a round of applause? He stayed with us for 3 hours. We appreciate you, Pastor Paul. And if we can just put up the slides up right now, I just want to come back and talk about what's coming up here in Lake Region. We're having a forum where we're working with the North American Division Public Affairs Religious Liberty Department, led by Orlin Johnson and Associate Director Melissa Reed. I'm partnering with Dr. Nicholas Miller, the PARL Director for Lake Union, and we're going to talk about strengthening police-community relations with the emphasis on Chicago, Illinois. Strengthening police-community relations with the emphasis on Chicago, Illinois. We want to make it very clear, very, very clear, that we believe in strengthening police-community relations, and we're cognizant of the fact that all police officers are not evil. So that's taking place August 15th at 5 p.m. We're coming back with the regional conferences perspective, and we're going to be telling the stories of regional conferences. And you're going to see more Generation X participation, but also Generation Z, as well as Millennials, but hearing from Generation Z what regional conferences mean to them and what they would like to see. So once again, this is a 3-part series. And the reason why we're talking about it is because I discovered that people did not know the true reason how we got regional conferences started. And there's a lot of misinformation, and we're trying to correct the myths, but also in correcting the myths, trying to have a broader engagement. This panel is a microcosm of the talented laity and clergy still engaged in regional conference across this country. And we want to bring everyone to the forefront. We do not have a philosophy that we have to have this one leadership model. We want to show you plenty of leaders with diverse skill sets that can help us sustain and grow our regional conferences so we can finish the work. So telling the stories of regional conferences taking place August 27 at 8:00 p.m. And then coming up in September, we're going to talk about faith and voting. Elder Jerome Hurst, Pastor Jerome Hurst, and Pastor Jason Ridley are going to be talking about faith and voting. And Pastor Hoy already hit it about voter registration, working with other churches to get out the vote and being a part of that. Then we're going to talk about ministry in a pandemic on September 12th. Ministry in a pandemic in terms of what has ministry look like in a pandemic. You're going to want to come out for that important discussion. For that, you will be excited about the lineup for that. For that lineup, ministry in a pandemic, I can share with you, we have Pastor Whitley Phipps, we have Dr. Abraham Jules, and we have Dr. Ainsworth Keith Morris. Dr. Whitley Phipps. We also have Pastor Tricia Wynn Payne from Conant Gardens, Seventh-day Adventist Church here in Lake Region, and Pastor Kimberly Bolgen from New Horizons in Wichita, Texas. And then the CJC virtual convention will take place September 25th and 26th. And you're going to want to hear more information on that. So please have this on your calendars. If you can bring me back up, I want to say thank you once again to our distinguished panelists. Thank you, Dr. Jason O'Rourke. Thank you, Pastor Dario Hoy. Thank you, Dr. Carlton P. Bird. Thank you so much, Sharon McKay. Thank you so much, Claudia Allen. And thank you so much, Pastor Dario Hoy. And then our special guests who are giving us knowledge so that we can be aware as Generation X and Millennials about what's happening in our church. I want to thank Elder Isaac Palmer. I want to thank Dr. Ifeoma Kwesi. And I want to thank my brother who is still the same, and for his patience and his endurance in working with me, Dr. Ivan Williams, for being on our program. Dr. Williams, if you can close us out with prayer, I thank you once again for being with us. And God bless each and every one of you. I'm greatly appreciative and in your debt.
Woody, thank you so much. As quiet as it's kept, you don't need permission to do righteously. You don't need permission to get involved. And you have modeled that, Woody. As quiet as it's kept, Woody is not paid for this, y'all. He's doing this in a conference office in a way that models for others who are not quote unquote clergy. And he's doing it because he's passionate about it. So Woody, I want to say thank you, man. Thank you from the bottom of our heart. Let's pray. Lord, today we have listened to your spirit and we have voiced what we've heard, what we felt, and what we've known for some of us for years. Thank you for a place to be able to share without reservation. Thank you for our panelists who have spoken truth to power. And I pray today, Lord, that from speech to action to vision, we will be able to put in place a movement again, as Sharon said. So bless our collaboration, bless our working together, bless the spirit of self-sacrifice. And Lord, may your name be glorified, and may we tear down these walls of partition. Thank you for giving us a possibility. Thank you for seeing something in us worth using and saving. In Jesus' name, amen.
God bless you and enjoy the rest of your week, and know that no matter what, God is sovereign and always in control. Be blessed.